Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Chapter 1. Here comes Charlie. These two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. And these two very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. This is Mr. Bucket and this is Miss Bucket. Mr. Bucket and Miss Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again? He is pleased to meet you. The whole of this family, the 6 grown-ups, count them, and little Charlie Bucket lived together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only 1 bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired they never got out of it. Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine on their side, Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina on their side. Mr. and Miss Bucket and little Charlie Bucket slept in the other room, upon mattresses on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house, or even 1 more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory, where he sat all day long at a bench and screwed the little caps onto the tops of the tubes of toothpaste after the tubes had been filled. But a toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money, and poor Mr. Bucket, however hard he worked and however fast he screwed on the caps, was never able to make enough to buy 1/2 of the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a bit better, but they all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same, everyone was allowed a second helping. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them, the 2 old grandparents, the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible, empty feeling in their tummy. Charlie felt it worst of all, and although his father and mother often went without their own share of lunch or supper so that they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. And one thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Walking to school in the morning, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled up high in the shop windows, and he would stop and stand and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see other children taking creamy candy bars out of their pocket and munching them greedily, and that, of course, was pure torture. Only once a year on his birthday did Charlie Bucket get ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion. And when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with one small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasure it as though it were a bar of solid gold. And for the next few days he would allow himself only to look at it but never touch it. Then at last, then he could stand it no longer. He would peel back a tiny bit of the paper wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny bit of chocolate. And then he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow a lovely sweet taste to spread out slowly over his tongue. The next day he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and so on. And in this way Charlie would make his 10-cent bar of birthday chocolate last him for more than a month. But I haven't yet told you about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything else. This thing for him was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows, or watching other children munching creamy candy bars right in front of him. It was the most terrible torturing thing you could imagine, and it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by the man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there has ever been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. It had huge iron gates leading into it, and a high wall surrounding it, and smoke belching from its chimneys, and strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside it. And outside the wall for half a mile around in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory, and every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly, and he would hold his nose high in the air and take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous chocolatey smell all around him. And now he loved that smell. And oh, now how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. Chapter 2. Mr. Willy Wonka's Factory. In the evening, after he had finished his supper of water and cabbage soup, Charlie always went into the room of his 4 grandparents to listen to their stories, and then afterwards to say good night. Every one of these old people was over 90. They were as shriveled as prunes and as bony as skeletons, and throughout the day, until Charlie made his appearance, they lay huddled in their own bed, 2 at either end, with nightcaps on to keep their heads warm, dozing the time away with nothing to do. But as soon as they heard the door opening and heard Charlie's voice saying, "Good evening, Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina," then all 4 of them would suddenly sit up, and their old wrinkled faces would light up with smiles of pleasure, and the talking would begin, for they loved this little boy. He was the only bright thing in their lives, and his evening visits were sometimes something that they looked forward to all day long. Often Charlie's mother and father would come in as well and stand by the door, listening to the stories that the old people told, and thus for perhaps half an hour every night, this room would be a happy place, become a happy place, and the whole family would forget that it was hungry and poor. One evening, when Charlie went in to see his grandparents, he said to them, "Is it really true that Wonka's chocolate factory is the biggest in the world?" "True," cried all four of them at once. "Of course it's true. Good heavens! Didn't you know that it's about 50 times as big as any other? And is Mr. Willy Wonka really the cleverest chocolate maker in the world?" My dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, raising himself up a little higher on his pillow, "Mr. Willy Wonka is the most amazing, the most fantastic, the most extraordinary chocolate maker the world has ever seen. I thought everybody knew that." "I knew he was famous, Grandpa Joe, and I knew he was very clever." "Clever?" cried the old man. "He's more than that. He's a magician with chocolate. He can make anything he wants. Isn't that a fact, my dear?" The other three old people nodded their heads slowly up and down and said, "Absolutely true. Just as true as can be." And Grandpa Joe said, "You mean to say I've never told you about Mr. Willy Wonka and his factory?" "Never," answered little Charlie. "Good heavens above, I don't know what's the matter with me." "Will you tell me now, Grandpa Joe, please?" "I certainly will. Sit down beside me on my bed, my dear, and listen carefully." Grandpa Joe was the oldest of the four grandparents. He was 96 and a half, and that is just about as old as anybody can be. Like all extremely old people, he was delicate and weak, and throughout the day he spoke very little. But in the evening, when Charlie, his beloved grandson, was in the room, he seemed in some marvelous way to grow quite young again. All the tiredness fell away from him, and he began as eager and excited as a young boy. "Oh, what a man he is, this Mr. Willy Wonka!" cried Grandpa Joe. "Did you know, for example, that he has himself invented more than 200 new kinds of candy bars, each with different scent, each far sweeter and creamier and more delicious than anything the other chocolate factories can make?" "Perfectly true," cried Grandma Josephine. "Spin, and he sends them all the four corners of the earth. Isn't that so, Grandpa Joe?" "Is it?" "It is, my dear, it is. And to all the kings and presidents of the world as well. But it isn't only candy bars that he makes. Oh, dear me, no. He has really fantastic inventions up his sleeve. Mr. Willy Wonka has. Did you know that he's invented a way of making chocolate ice cream so that it stays cold for hours, it stays cold for hours and hours without being in the icebox? You can even leave it lying in the sun all morning on a hot day and it won't go runny." "But that's impossible," said little Charlie, starting at his grandfather. "Oh, of course it's impossible," cried Grandpa Joe. "It's completely absurd. But Mr. Willy Wonka has done it." "Quite right," the others agreed, nodding their heads. "Mr. Wonka has done it." And then again, Grandpa Joe went on, speaking very slowly now so that Charlie wouldn't miss a word. "Mr. Willy Wonka can make marshmallows that taste of violets and rich caramels that change color every 10 seconds as you suck them, and little feathery sweets that melt away deliciously the moment you put them between your lips. He can make chewing gums that never loses its taste, and candy balloons that you can blow up to enormous sizes before you pop them with a pin and gobble them up. And by a more secret method, you can make lovely blue bird's eggs with black spots on them. And when you put one of those in your mouth, it gradually gets smaller and smaller until suddenly there is nothing left except a tiny little pink sugary baby bird sitting on the top of your tongue. Grandpa Joe paused and ran the point of his tongue slowly over his lips. It makes my mouth water just thinking about it, he said. Mine too, said little Charlie. But please go on. While they were talking, Mr. and Miss Bucket, Charlie's mother and father, had come quietly into the room, and now both were standing inside the door listening. Tell Charlie about the crazy Indian prince, said Grandma Josephine. He'd like to hear that. You mean Prince Pondicherry? Said Grandpa Joe, and he began chuckling with laughter. Completely dotty, said Grandpa George. But very rich, said Grandma Georgina. What did he do? Asked Charlie eagerly. Listen, said Grandpa Joe, and I'll tell you. Chapter 3. Mr. Wonka and the Indian Princess. Prince Pondicherry wrote a letter to Mr. Willy Wonka, said Grandpa Joe, and he asked him to come all the way out to India and build him a colossal palace entirely out of chocolate. Did Mr. Wonka do it, Grandpa? He did indeed. And what a palace it was. It had 100 rooms, and everything was made of either dark or light chocolate. The bricks were chocolate, and the cement holding them together was chocolate. And the windows were chocolate, and all the walls and ceilings were made of chocolate. So were the carpets and the pictures and the furniture and the beds. And when you turn on the taps in the bathroom, hot chocolate came pouring out. But it was all finished. Mr. Wonka said to Prince Pondicherry, I warn you though, it won't last very long, so you'd better start eating it right away. Nonsense, shouted the prince. I'm not going to eat my palace. I'm not even going to nibble the staircase or lick the walls. I'm going to live in it. But Mr. Wonka was right, of course, because soon after this there became a very hot day with a boiling sun, and the whole palace began to melt, and then sank slowly to the ground, and the crazy prince, who was dozing in the living room at the time, woke up to find himself swimming around in a huge brown sticky lake of chocolate. Little Charlie sat very still on the edge of the bed, staring at his grandfather. Charlie's face was bright, and his eyes were stretched so wide you could see the whites all around. Is all this really true? He asked, or are you pulling my leg? It's true, cried all four of the old people at once. Of course it's true. Ask anyone you like, and I'll tell you something else that's true, said Grandpa Joe. And now he leaned closer to Charlie and lowered his voice to a soft secret whisper. Nobody ever comes out. Out of where? Asked Charlie. And nobody ever goes in. In where? Cried Charlie. Wonka's factory, of course. Grandpa, what do you mean? I mean workers, Charlie. Workers? All factories, said Grandpa Joe, have workers streaming in and out of the gates in the mornings and evenings, except Wonka's. Have you ever seen a single person going into that place or coming out? Little Charlie looked slowly around each of the four old faces. One after the other, they all looked back at him. They were friendly, smiling faces, but they were also quite serious. There was no sign of joking or leg pulling on any of them. Well, have you? Asked Grandpa Joe. I really don't know, Grandpa, Charlie stammered. Whenever I walk past the factory, the gates seem to be closed. Exactly, said Grandpa Joe, but there must be people working there. Not people, Charlie. Not ordinary people, anyway. Then who? Cried Charlie. Aha! That's it, you see. That's another of Mr. Willy Wonka's cleverness. Charlie, dear, Miss Bucket called out from where she was standing by the door. It's time for bed. That's enough for tonight. But, Mother, I must see it tomorrow, my darling. That's right, said Grandpa Joe. I'll tell you the rest of it tomorrow evening. Chapter 4. The Secret Workers. The next evening, Grandpa Joe went on with his story. You see, Charlie, he said, not so very long ago, there used to be thousands of people working in Mr. Willy Wonka's factory. Then one day, all of a sudden, Mr. Wonka had to ask every single one of them to leave, to go home, never to come back. But why? Asked Charlie. Because of spies. Spies? Yes, all the other chocolate makers, you see, had to begun to grow jealous of the wonderful candies that Mr. Wonka was making, and they started sending in spies to steal his secret recipes. The spies took jobs in the Wonka factory, pretending that they were ordinary workers, and while they were there, each one of them found out exactly how a certain special thing was made. And did they go back to their own factories and tell? Asked Charlie. They must have, answered Grandpa Joe, because soon after that, big old Grubber's factory started making an ice cream that would never melt, even in the hottest sun. Then Mr. Prawn-Nose's factory came out with a chewing gum that never lost its flavor, however much you chewed it. And then Mr. Slugworth's factory began making candy balloons that you could blow up to huge sizes before you popped them with a pin or gobbled them up. And so on and so on. And Mr. Willy Wonka tore his beard and shouted, "This is terrible! I shall be ruined! There are spies everywhere! I shall have to close the factory." But he didn't do that, Charlie said. Oh, yes, he did. He told all the workers that he was sorry, but they will have to go home. Then he shut the main gates and fastened them with a chain. And suddenly Wonka's giant factory became silent and deserted. The chimneys stopped smoking. The machines stopped whirring. And from then on, not a single chocolate or candy was made. Not a soul went in or out. And even Mr. Willy Wonka himself disappeared completely. Months and months went by, Grandpa Joe went on, but still the factory remained closed, and everybody said, "Poor Mr. Wonka, he was so nice, and he made such marvelous things, but he's finished now. It's all over." Then something astonishing happened. One day early in the morning, thin columns of white smoke were seen to be coming out of the tops of the tall chimney of the factory. People in town stopped and stared. "What's going on?" they cried. "Someone's lit the furnaces. Mr. Wonka must be opening up again." They ran to the gates, expecting to see them wide open, and Mr. Wonka standing there to welcome his workers back. But no, the great iron gates were still locked and chained as securely as ever, and Mr. Wonka was nowhere to be seen. "But the factory is working," the people shouted. "Listen, you can hear the machines. They're all whirring again, and you can smell the smell of melting chocolate in the air." Grandpa Joe leaned forward and laid a long bony finger on Charlie's knee, and he said softly, but most mysterious of all, Charlie were the shadows in the windows of the factory. The people standing on the street outside could see small dark shadows moving out behind the frosted glass windows. Showers of warm, said Charlie quickly. That's exactly what everybody else wanted to know. The place is full of workers, the people shouted, but nobody's gone in. The gates are locked. It's crazy. Nobody ever comes out either. But there was no question at all, said Grandpa Joe, that the factory was running, and it's gone on running ever since for these last 10 years. What's more, the chocolate and candies it's been turning out have become more fantastic and delicious all the time. And of course now, when Mr. Wonka invents some new and wonderful candy, neither Mr. Fickle Grubber, nor Mr. Prawn-Nose, nor Mr. Slugworth, nor anybody else is able to copy it. No spies can go into the factory to find out how it is made. But Grandpa, who? Cried Charlie. Who is Mr. Wonka using to do all the work in the factory? Nobody knows, Charlie. But that's absurd. Hasn't someone asked Mr. Wonka? Nobody sees him anymore. He never comes out. The only thing that come out of the place are chocolates and candies. They come out through a special trapdoor in the wall, all packed and addressed, and they are picked up every day by post office trucks. But Grandpa, what sort of people are they that work in there? My dear boy, said Grandpa Joe, that is one of the great mysteries of the chocolate-making world. We know only one thing about them. They are very small. They faint showers and sometimes disappears behind the windows, especially late at night. When the lights are on, are those of tiny people no taller than mine. There aren't any such people, Charlie said. Just then, Mr. Bucket, Charlie's father, came into the room. He was home from the toothpaste factory, and he was reading an evening newspaper rather excitedly. Have you heard the news? He cried. He held up the paper so they could see the huge headlines. The headline said, Wonka Factory to be opened at last to lucky few. 5. The golden tickets. You mean people are actually going to be allowed to go inside the factory? Cried Grandpa Joe. Read us what it says. Quickly. All right, said Mr. Bucket, smoothing out the newspaper. Listen. Mr. Willy Wonka, the candy-making genius whom nobody has ever seen for the last 10 years, sent out the following notice today. I, Willy Wonka, have decided to allow 5 children, just 5, mind you, and no more, to visit my factory this year. These lucky 5 will be shown around personally by me, and they will be allowed to see all the secrets and magic of my factory. Then, at the end of the tour, as a special present, all of them will be given enough chocolates and candies to last them for the rest of their lives. So watch out for the golden tickets. 5 golden tickets have been printed on the golden paper, and these 5 golden tickets have been hidden underneath the ordinary wrapping paper of 5 ordinary candy bars. These 5 candy bars may be anywhere, in any shop, in any street, in any town, in any country in the world, upon any counter where Wonka's candies are sold. And the 5 lucky finders of these 5 golden tickets were the only ones who will be allowed to visit my factory and see what it's like in the inside. Good luck to you all, and happy hunting! Signed by Willy Wonka. The man's dirty, muttered Grandma Josephine. He's brilliant, cried Grandpa Joe. He's a magician. Just imagine what will happen now. The whole world will be searching for those gold tickets. Everyone will be buying Wonka's candy bars in the hope of finding one. He'll sell more than ever before. Oh, how exciting it would be to find one. And all the chocolates and chocolate and candies that you could eat for the rest of your life. Free, said Grandpa George. Just imagine that. They have to deliver them in a truck, said Grandma Georgina. It makes me quite ill to think of it, said Grandpa Josephine. Nonsense, cried Grandpa Joe. Wouldn't it be something, Charlie, to open a bar of candy and see a golden ticket glistening inside? It certainly would, Grandpa, but there isn't a hope, Charlie said sadly. I only get one bar a year. You never know, darling, said Grandma Georgina. It's your birthday next week. You have as much chance as anybody else. I'm afraid that simply isn't true, said Grandpa George. Kids who are going to find the golden tickets are the ones who can afford to buy candy bars every day. Our Charlie gets only one a year. There isn't a hope. Chapter 6. The first two finders. The very next day, the first golden ticket was found. The finder was a boy called Augusta Gloop. And Mr. Bucket's evening news carried a large picture of him on the front page. The picture showed a 9-year-old boy who was enormously fat. He looked as though he had been blown up with a powerful plump. Great flabby hordes of fat bulged out from each part of his body, and his face like a monstrous ball of dough with two small, greedy, curranty eyes peering out upon the world. The town in which Augusta Gloop lived, the newspaper said, had gone wild with excitement over their hero. Flags were flying all the windows. Children had been given a holiday from school, and a parade has been organized in honor of a famous youth. I just knew Augusta would find a golden ticket, his mother had told the newspaper. He ate so many candy bars a day that it was almost impossible for him not to find one. Eating is his hobby, you know. For him not to find one, eating is his hobby, you know. That's all he's interested in. But still, that's better than being a hooligan and shooting off zip guns and things like that in his spare time, isn't it? And what I always say is he wouldn't go on eating like he does unless he needs nourishment, would he? It's all vitamins anyway. What a thrill it will be for him to visit Mr. Wonka's marvelous factory. We're just as proud as we can be. What a revolting woman, said Grandma Josephine. What a repulsive boy, said Grandma Georgina. Only 4 golden tickets left, said Grandpa George. I wonder who'll get those. And now the whole country, indeed the whole world, seems suddenly to get caught up in a mad candy buying spree. Everybody searching frantically for those precious remaining tickets. Fully grown women were seen going into sweet shops and buying 10 Wonka candy bars at a time, then tearing off the wrappers on the spot and peering eagerly underneath for a glint of gold paper. Children were taking hammers and smashing their piggy banks and running out to the shops with handfuls of money. In one city, a famous gangster robbed a bank of $5,000 and spent the whole lot on candy bars that same afternoon. And when the police entered his house to arrest him, they found him sitting on the floor amidst mountains of candy, ripping off the wrappers with the blade of a long dagger. In far-off Russia, a woman named Charlotte Roos claimed to have found the second ticket, but it turned out to be a clever fake. In England, the famous scientist Professor Fullbody invented a machine which would tell you at once without opening the wrapper of a candy bar whether or not there was a golden ticket hidden underneath it. The machine had a mechanical arm that shot out with tremendous force and grabbed hold of it that had the slightest bit of gold inside it. And for a moment, it looked like the answer to everything. But unfortunately, while the professor was showing off the machine to the public at the candy counter of a large department, the mechanical arm shot out and made a grab for the gold filling in the back tooth of the Duchess, who was standing nearby. That was an ugly scene, and the machine was smashed by the crowd. Suddenly, on the day before Charlie Bucket's birthday, the newspaper announced that the second golden ticket has been found. The lucky person was a small girl called Veruca Salt, who lived with her rich parents in a great city far away. Once again, Mr. Bucket's evening newspaper carried a big picture of the finder. She was sitting between her beaming father and mother in the living room of the house, waving the golden ticket above her head and grinning from ear to ear. Veruca's father, Mr. Salt, had eagerly explained to the newspaperman exactly how the ticket was found. "You see, fellers," he had said, "as soon as my little girl told me that she simply had to have one of those golden tickets, I went out into town and started buying up all the Wonka candy bars I can lay on my hands. Thousands of them I must have bought, hundreds of thousands. When I had them loaded onto trucks and sent directly to my own factory, I'm in the peanut business, you see, and I've got about 100 women working for me over at my joints, shell peanuts for roasting and salting. That's what they do all day long. Those women, they sit here shelling peanuts. So I says to them, "Okay, girls," I say, "from now on you can stop shelling peanuts and start shelling the wrappers off this crazy candy bar instead." And they did. I had even every workers in the place yanking the papers off those bars of candy chocolate full speed ahead from morning to night. But 3 days went by and we had no luck. Oh, it was terrible. My little Veruca got more and more upset each day. And every time I went home, she would scream at me, "Where's my golden ticket? I want my golden ticket." And she would lie for hours on the floor, kicking and yelling in the most disturbing way. Well, sir, I just hated to see my little girl feeling unhappy like that. So I vowed I would keep on up the search until I got her what she wanted. Then suddenly, on the evening on the fourth day, one of my women workers yelled, "I got it! A golden ticket!" And I said, "Give it to me, quick!" And she did. And I rushed it home and gave it to my darling, Veruca. And now she is all smiles, and we have a happy home once more. That's even worse than the fat boy," said Grandma Josephine. "She needs a real good spanking," said Grandma Georgina. "I don't think the girl's father played it quite fair, Grandpa, do you?" Charlie mumbled. He spoils her, Grandpa Joe, and he spoils us, Grandpa Joe said, "and no good can ever come from spoiling a child like that." "Charlie, come to bed, darling," said Charlie's mother. "Tomorrow's your birthday, don't forget that. So I expect you'll be awake early to open your present. A Wonka candy bar, cried Charlie. It is a Wonka candy bar, isn't it? Yes, my love, his mother said. Of course it is. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I found the third golden ticket inside it? Charlie asked. Bring it in here when you get it, Grandpa Joe said. Then we can all watch you take off the wrapper. Chapter 7. Charlie's birthday. Happy birthday, cried the 4 old grandparents as Charlie came into their room early the next morning. Charlie smiled nervously and sat down on the edge of the bed. He was holding his present, his only present, very carefully in his 2 hands. Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight, it said on the wrapper. The 4 old people, 2 at either end of the bed, propped themselves up on the pillows and stared with anxious eyes at the candy ball in Charlie's hand. Mr. and Miss Bucket came in and stood at the foot of the bed, watching Charlie. The room became silent. Everybody was waiting now for Charlie to start opening his present. Charlie looked down at the candy bar. He ran his finger slowly back and forth along the length of it, stroking it lovingly, and the shiny paper wrapper made a little sharp, crackly noise in the quiet room. Then Mr. Bucket said gently, You mustn't be too disappointed, my darling. If you don't find what you're looking for underneath the wrapper, you really can't expect to be as lucky as all that. She's quite right, Mr. Bucket said. Charlie didn't say anything. After all, Grandma Josephine said, in the whole world, there are only 3 tickets left to be found. The thing to remember, Grandma Georgina said, is that what happens, you still have the candy bar of candy. Wonka Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight, cried Grandpa George. It's the best of them all. You'll just love it. Yes, Charlie whispered. I know. Just forget all about those golden tickets and enjoy the candy, Grandpa Joe said. Why don't you do that? They all knew it was ridiculous to expect this one poor little candy bar to have a magic ticket inside it, and they were trying as gently as kind as they could to prepare Charlie for the disappointment. But there was this one other thing that the grown-ups also knew, and it was this, and that however small a chance might be of striking, the chance was there. The chance had to be there. This particular candy bar had as much chance as any other of having a golden ticket, and that was why all the grandparents and parents in the room were actually just as tense and excited as Charlie was. Although they were pretending to be very calm. You'd better go ahead and open it up, or you'll be late for school, Grandpa Joe said. You might as well go get it over with, Grandpa George said. Open it, my dear, Grandma Georgina said. Please open it. You're making me jumpy. Very slowly, Charlie's finger began to tear open one small corner of the wrapping paper. The old people in the bed all leaned forward, craning their scraggy necks. Then suddenly, as though he couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Charlie tore the wrapper right down and the middle, and onto his lap there fell a light brown, creamy colored chocolate candy bar. There was no sign of a golden ticket anywhere. Well, that's that, said Grandpa Joe brightly. It's just what we expected. Charlie looked up. 4 kind of old faces were watching him intently from the bed. He smiled at them, a small, sad smile. Then he shrugged his shoulder and picked up the candy bar and held it out to his mother and said, "Here, Mother, have a bit. We'll share it. I want everybody to taste it." "Certainly not," his mother said. And all the others all cried, No, we couldn't dream of it. It's all yours." Please, begged Charlie, turning around and offering it to Grandpa Joe. But neither he nor anyone else would take even a tiny bite. "It's time to go to school, my darling," Miss Bucket said, putting an arm around him. Charlie's skinny shoulder. "Come on, or you'll be late." Chapter 8. 2 more golden tickets found. That evening, Mr. Bucket's newspaper announced the finding of not only the 3rd golden ticket, but the 4th golden ticket as well. 2 golden tickets found today, screamed the headlines. "Only 1 more left." "All right," said Grandpa Joe when the whole family was gathered in the old people's room after supper. "Let's hear who found them." "The 3rd ticket," read Mr. Bucket, holding the newspaper up close to his face because his eyes were bad and he couldn't afford glasses. "The 3rd ticket was found by Miss Violet Beauregarde." There was great excitement in the Beauregarde household when our reporter arrived to interview the lucky young lady. Cameras were clicking and flashbulbs were flashing and people were pushing and jostling and trying to get a bit closer to the famous girl. And the famous girl was standing on a chair in the living room waving the golden ticket madly at arm's length, as though she was flagging the taxi. She was talking very fast and very loudly to everyone, but it was not easy to hear all that she said because she was chewing so furiously upon a piece of gum at the same time. "I'm a gum chewer normally," she shouted, "but when I heard about these ticket things, Mr. Wonkus, I laid off Lucky. I laid off the gum and switched to candy bars in the hope of selecting Lucky. Now, of course, I'm right back on gum. I just adore gum. I can't do without it. I munch it all day long except for a few minutes at meal times. That when I take it out and stick it behind my ear for safekeeping. To tell you the honest truth, I simply wouldn't feel comfortable if I didn't have a little wedge of gum to chew on every moment of the day. I really wouldn't. My mother says it's not ladylike, and it looks ugly to see a girl's jaws going up and down like mine do all the time. But I don't agree. And who's she to criticize anyway? Because if you ask me, I'd say that her jaws are going up and down almost as much as mine are, just from yelling at me every minute of the day. "Now, Violet," Miss Beauregarde said from the far corner of the room, where she was standing on the piano to avoid being trampled by the mob. "All right, Mother, keep your hair on," Miss Beauregarde shouted. "And now," she went on, turning to the reporters again, "it may interest you to know that this piece of gum I'm chewing right at this moment is one I've been working on for over 3 months solid. That's a record, that is. It's beaten the record held by my best friend, Miss Cornelia Prince-Metal. And was she mad? It's my most treasured possession now. This piece of gum is. At night, I just stick it on the end of the bedpost, and it's as good as ever in the mornings. A bit hard at first, maybe, but it soon softens up again after I've given it a few good chews. Before I start chewing for the world record, I used to change my piece of gum every day. I used to do it in our elevator on the way home from school. Why the elevator? Because I like sticking the gooey piece that I just finished with onto one of the elevator buttons. Then the next person who came along and pressed the button got my old gum at the end of his or her finger. Ha ha! And what a racket they kicked up. Some of them. You get the best results with women who have expensive gloves on. Oh yes, I'm thrilled to be going to Mr. Wonka's factory. Oh yes, I'm thrilled to be going to Mr. Wonka's factory. And I understand that afterwards he's going to give me enough gum to last me for the rest of my life. Whoopee, hooray! Beastly girl, said Grandma Josephine. That's P. Cable, said Grandma Georgina. She'll come to a sticky end one day, chewing all that gum. You see if she doesn't. And who got the fourth golden ticket, Daddy? Charlie asked. Now let me see, said Mr. Bucket, peering at the newspaper again. Ah, yes, here we are. The fourth golden ticket, he read, was found by a boy called Mike TV. And another bad lot, I'll be bound, muttered Grandma Josephine. Don't interrupt, Grandma, said Miss Bucket. The TV household, said Mr. Bucket, going on with his reading, was crammed, like all the others, with excited visitors when our reporter arrived. But young Mike TV, the lucky winner, seemed extremely annoyed by the whole business. Can't you fools see I'm watching television? He said angrily. Now she wouldn't interrupt. The 9-year-old boy was sitting before an enormous television set, with his eyes glued to the screen, and he was watching a film in which one bunch of gangsters was shooting up another bunch of gangsters with machine guns. Mike TV himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging from belts around his body, and every now and again he would leap up into the air and fire off half a dozen rounds from one or another of these weapons. Quiet, he shouted when someone tried to ask him a question. Didn't I tell you not to interrupt? This show's an absolute whiz-banger. It's terrific. I watch it every day. I watch all of them every day, even the crummy ones, where there's no shooting. I like the gangsters best. They're terrific, those gangsters, especially when they start pumping each other full of lead or flashlight. The old stilettos, or giving each other the 1, 2, 3 with their knuckle dusters. Oh boy, that wouldn't I give to be doing that myself. It's the life, I tell you. It's terrific. That's quite enough, snapped Grandma Josephine. I can't bear to listen to it. No me, said Grandma Georgina. Do all children behave like this nowadays? Like these brats we've been hearing about? Of course not, said Mr. Bucket, smiling at the old lady in the bed. Some do, of course. In fact, quite a lot of them do, but not all. And now there's only one ticket left, said Grandpa George. Quite so, sniffed Grandma Georgina. And just as sure I'll be having cabbage soup for supper tomorrow. That ticket to go to some nasty little beast who doesn't deserve it. Chapter 9. Grandpa Joe takes a gamble. The next day, when Charlie came home from school and went in to see his grandparents, he found that only Grandpa Joe was awake. The other three were all snoring loudly. "Shh!" whispered Grandpa Joe, and he beckoned Charlie to come closer. Charlie tiptoed over and stood beside the bed. The old man gave Charlie a sly grin, and he started rummaging under his pillow with one hand. And when the hand came out again, there was an ancient leather purse clutched in the fingers under the undercover of the bedclothes. The old man opened the purse and tipped it upside down. Out fell a single silver 10-cent piece. "It's my secret hoard," he whispered. "The others don't know I've got it. And now you and I are going to have one more feeling at finding that last ticket. How about it, eh? But you'll have to help me. Are you sure you want to spend your money on that, Grandpa?" Charlie whispered. "Of course I'm sure," spluttered the old man excitedly. Don't stand there arguing. I'm just as crazy as you are to find that ticket. Here, take the money and run down to the street to the nearest store and buy the first Wonka candy bar you see and bring it straight back to me, and we'll open it together." Charlie took a little silver coin and slipped quickly out of the room. In 5 minutes, he was back. "Have you got it?" whispered Grandpa Joe, his eyes shining with excitement. Charlie nodded and held out the candy bar. "Wonka's Nutty Crunch Surprise," he said on the wrapper. "Good," the old man whispered, sitting up in bed and rubbing his hand. "Now come over here and sit close to me, and we'll open it together. Are you ready?" "Yes," Charlie said. "I'm ready." "All right. You tear off the first bit." "No," Charlie said. "You paid for it. You do it all." The old man's fingers were trembling most terribly as they fumbled with the candy bar. "We don't have a hope, really," he whispered, giggling a bit. "You do know we don't have a hope, don't you?" "Yes," Charlie said. "I know that." They looked at each other and both started giggling nervously. "Mind you," said Grandpa Joe, "there's just that tiny chance that it might be the one. Don't you agree?" "Yes," Charlie said. "Of course. Why don't you open it, Grandpa?" "All in good time, my boy, all in good time. Which end do you think I ought to open first?" "That corner, the one furthest from you. Just tear off a tiny bit, but not quite enough for us to see anything." "Like that?" said the old man. "Yes, now a little bit more." "You finish it," said Grandpa Joe. "I'm too nervous." "No, Grandpa. You must do it yourself." "Very well, then. Here goes." He tore off the paint wrapper. They both stared at what lay underneath. It was a bar of candy bar, nothing more. All at once, they both saw the funny inside of the whole thing, and they burst into peals of laughter. "What the heck's going on?" cried Grandpa Josephine, waking up suddenly. "Nothing," said Grandpa Joe. "You go on back to sleep." Chapter 10. The family begins to starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw the huge flakes drifting slowly down out of an icy sky that was the color of steel. By morning, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping, and oh, how bitter cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. Inside the house, little drops of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the window and under the doors, and there was no place to go to escape them. the 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. Their excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the two vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There is something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Most of us find ourselves began to crave rich steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious warming dishes. And because we are all great deal luckier when we realize we usually get what we want or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on and on, he became ravenously and desperately hungry. Both bars of candy, the birthday one and the one Grandpa Joe had bought, had long since been nibbled away, and all he knew now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. Then all at once the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was that the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket suddenly went bust and had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that 7 people needed. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person now, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve, and every day little Charlie Bucket, trudging through the snow on his way to school, would have to pass Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory, and every day as it came near, he would lift his small pointed nose high in the air and sniff the wonderful sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep swallowing breaths as though he was trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head up from under the blanket one icy morning. "That child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We are too old to bother with. But a growing boy? He can't go on like this. He is beginning to look like a skeleton." "What do we do? What can we do?" muttered Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear that his mother tried to slip her own piece of bread onto his plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back." He's a fine little fellow," said Grandpa George. "He deserves better than this." The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. His skin was drawn so tightly over the cheeks that you could see the shape of the bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did, so as to save his strength. In the morning, he left the house 10 minutes early so that he could walk slowly to school without ever having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during recess, resting himself, while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face and instantly feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye was caught suddenly by a piece of paper that was lying in the gutter in the snow. The paper was a greenish color, that there was something vaguely familiar about it. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a dollar bill. Quickly he looked around. Had someone just dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him at the side. Their chins sunk deep in the collars of their coats, with their feet crunching in the snow. None of them was searching for any money. None of them was taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then was it this dollar? Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole dollar. He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him at the moment. Only one thing. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving toward the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was the newspaper and stationery store, the kind that sells most everything, including candy and cigars. And what he would do, he whispered quickly to himself. He would buy one luscious bar of candy and eat it all up, every bit of it. Right then and there, and the rest of the money he would take straight back home and give it to his mother. Chapter 11. The Miracle. Charlie entered the store and laid the damp dollar bill on the counter. One Wonka's wimple scrumptious fudge mallow delight, he said, remembering how much he had loved the one he had on his birthday. The man behind the counter looked fat and well-fed. He had big lips and fat cheeks and a very fat neck. The fat around his neck bulged out all around the top of his collar like a rubber ring. He turned and reached behind him for the candy bar. Then he turned back and handed it to Charlie. Charlie grabbed it quickly, tore off the wrapper and took an enormous bite. Then took another and another. And oh, the joy of being able to cram large pieces of something sweet and solid into one's mouth. The sheer blissful joy of being able to fill one's mouth with rich, solid food. You look like you wanted that one, Sonny, the shopkeeper said pleasantly. Charlie nodded, his mouth bulging with chocolate. The shopkeeper put Charlie's change on the counter. Take it easy, he said. I'll give you a goat egg if you swallow it. Without chewing. Charlie went on wolfing the candy. He couldn't stop, and in less than half a minute, the whole thing had disappeared down his throat. He was quite out of breath, but he felt marvelously, extraordinarily happy. He reached out a hand to take the change. Then he paused. His hands were just above the level of the counter. They were starting out at the little silver coins lying there. The coins were all dimes. There were 9 of them together. Surely it wouldn't matter if he spent just one more. I think, he said quietly, I think I'll just have one more of those candy bars. The same kind as before, please. Why not? The fat shopkeeper said, reaching behind him again and taking another wimple scrumptious fudge mallow delight from the shelf. He laid it on the counter. Charlie picked it up and tore it off the wrapper, and suddenly from underneath the wrapper there came a brilliant flash of gold. Charlie's heart stood still. It's a golden ticket, screamed the shopkeeper, leaping up out about a foot in the air. You've got a golden ticket. You found the last golden ticket. Hey, what do you know? Come and look at this, everybody. The kids found Wonka's last golden ticket. There it is. It's right there in his hands. It seemed as though the shopkeeper might be going to have a fit. In my shop too, he yelled. He found it right here in my own little shop. Somebody call the newspaper quick and let them know. Watch out now, Sonny. Don't tear it as you unwrap it. That thing's precious. In a few seconds, there was a crowd of about 20 people clustering around Charlie, and many more were pushing their way in from the street. Everybody wanted to get a look at the golden ticket and at the lucky finder. Where is it? Somebody shouted. Hold it up so all of us can see it. There it is, there, someone else shouted. He's holding it in his hand. See the gold shining? How did he manage to find it? I'd like to know. A large boy shouted angrily. 20 balls a day. I've been banged for weeks and weeks. Think of all the free stuff he'll be getting too, another boy said enviously. A lifetime supply. He'll need it. The skinny little shrimp, a girl said laughing. Charlie didn't move. He hadn't even unwrapped the golden ticket from around the candy bar. He was standing very still, holding it tight with both hands while the crowd pushed and shouted all around him. He felt quite dizzy. There was a peculiar floating sensation coming over him, as though he were floating up in the air like a balloon. His feet didn't seem to be touching the ground at all. He could hear his heart thumping away loudly somewhere in his throat. At that point, he became aware of a hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw a tall man standing over him. Listen, the man whispered, I'll buy it from here. I'll give you $50. How about it, eh? And I'll give you a new bicycle as well, okay? Are you crazy? Shouted a woman who was standing equally close. Why, I'd give him $500 for that ticket. You want to sell that ticket for $500, young man? That's quite enough of that, the fat shopkeeper shouted, pushing his way through the crowd and taking Charlie firmly by the arm. Leave the kid alone, will you? Make way here, let him out. And to Charlie, as he led him out to the door, he whispered, Don't you let anybody have it. Take it straight home quickly before you lose it. Run all the way and don't stop till you get there. You understand? Charlie nodded. You know something, the fat shopkeeper said, pausing in a moment and smiling at Charlie. I have a feeling you need a brick like this. You needed a brick like this. I'm awfully glad you got it. Good luck to you, Sonny. Thank you, Charlie said, and off he went, running through the snow as fast as his legs would go. And as he flew past Mr. Willy Wonka's factory, he turned and waved at it and sang, I'll be seeing you soon. And 5 minutes later, he arrived at his own home. Chapter 12. What it said on the golden ticket. Charlie burst through the front door shouting, Mother, Mother, Mother! Miss Bucket was in the old grandparents' room serving them the evening soup. Mother! Yelled Charlie, rushing in on them like a hurricane. Look, I've got it! Look, Mother, look, the last golden ticket. It's mine. I found some money in the street and about 2 candy bars, and the second one had the golden ticket, and there were crowds of people all around me wanting to see it, and the shopkeeper rescued me, and I ran all the way home, and here I am. It's the 5th golden ticket, Mother, and I found it. Miss Bucket simply stood and stared while the 4 old grandparents were sitting up in bed, balancing bowls of soup on their laps. All dropped their spoons with a clatter of rolls against their pillows. For about 10 seconds, there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then, very softly, Grandpa Joe said, You're pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You're having a little joke. I am not, cried Charlie, rushing up to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then, very slowly, with a slow and marvelous grin spreading all over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The color was rushing to his cheeks, and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy. And in the center of each eye, right in the center, in the black pupil, a little spark of wild excitement was slowly dancing. Then the old man took a deep breath, and suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, an explosion seemed to take place inside him. He threw up his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time, his long, bony body rose up out of the bed, and his bowl of soup went flying into the face of Grandma Josephine, and in one fantastic leap, this old fellow of 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of bed since the last 20 years, jumped up onto the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pants. "Yippee!" he shouted. "3 cheers for Charlie! Hip, hip, hooray!" At this point, the door opened and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cool and tight, and he looked it. All day long he had been shoveling snow in the streets. "Cripes!" he cried. "What's going on in here?" It didn't take long to tell him what had happened. "I don't believe it," he said. "It's not impossible. Show him the ticket, Charlie," shouted Grandpa Joe, who was still dancing around the floor like a dervish in his striped pajamas. "Send your father the 5th and last golden ticket in the world." "Let me see it, Charlie," Mr. Bucket said, clasping into a chair, holding out his hand. Charlie came forward with the precious document. It was a very beautiful thing. This golden ticket, having been made, so it seemed, from a sheet of pure gold hammered out almost to the thinness of paper. On one side of it, printed by some clever method in jet black letters, was an invention itself from Mr. Wonka. "Read it out loud," said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into bed again. At last, let's all hear exactly what it said. It says, Mr. Bucket held a lovely golden ticket up close to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly, and he seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths, and then he cleared his throat and said, "All right, I'll read it. Here we go. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket, from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises will wait to you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for the one whole day. And you and all others who are lucky enough to find my golden tickets, I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything that there is to see. And afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious eatables to last you and your entire household for many years. If at any moment, at any time thereafter you should run out of supplies, you have only to come back to the factory and show this golden ticket, and I shall be happy to refill your cupboard with whatever you want. In this way, you will be able to keep yourself supplied with tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting thing that will happen on the day of your visit. I am preparing other surprises that are even more marvelous and more fantastic for you and for all my beloved golden ticket holders. Mystic and marvelous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue you, astonish, and perplex you beyond measure in your wildest dreams. You could not imagine that such thing could happen to you. Just do it and see. And here are your instructions. The day I have chosen for the visit is the first day in the month of February. On this day and no other day, you must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late, and you are allowed to bring with you either one or two members of your own family to look after you and to ensure that you don't get into mischief. One more thing, be certain to have this ticket with you, otherwise you will not be admitted. Signed, Willy Wonka. The first day of February, cried Miss Bucket. But that's tomorrow. Today is the last day of January. I know it is. Cripes, said Mr. Bucket. I think you're right. You're just in time, shouted Grandpa Joe. There's not a moment to lose. You must start making preparations at once. Wash your face, comb your hairs, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose, cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sake, get all that mud off your pants. You must get ready, my boy. You must get ready for the biggest day of your life. Now, don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa, Miss Bucket said, and don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all try to keep very calm. Now, the first thing to decide is this. Who is going to go with Charlie to the factory? I will, shouted Grandpa Joe, leaping out of bed once again. I'll take him. I'll look after him. You leave it to me. Miss Bucket smiled at the old man. Then she turned to her husband and said, How about you, dear? Don't you think you ought to go? Well, Mr. Bucket said, pausing to think about it. No, I'm not so sure that I should. But you must. There's no must about it, my dear, Mr. Bucket said gently. Mind you, I'd love to go. It'll be tremendously exciting, but on the other hand, I believe that the person who really deserves to go of all is Grandpa Joe himself. He seemed to know more about it than we do, provided, of course, that he feels well enough. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing around the room. He certainly seems well enough, Miss Bucket said, laughing. Yes, perhaps you're right after all. Perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one to go with him. I certainly can't go myself and leave the other three old people all alone in bed for a whole day. Hallelujah! Yelled Grandpa Joe. Praise the Lord! At that point, there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment, swarms of newspapermen and photographers were pouring into the house. They had tracked down the finder of the 5th gold ticket, and now they all wanted to get the full story for the front page of morning papers. For several hours, there was complete pandemonium in the little house, and it must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them so that Charlie could go to bed. Chapter 13. The big day arrives. The sun was shining brightly on the morning of the big day, but the ground was still white with snow and the air was very cold. Outside the gates of Wonka's factory, enormous crowds of people had gathered to watch the 5 lucky gold ticket holders going in. The excitement was tremendous. It was just before 10 o'clock. The crowds were pushing and shouting, and policemen with arms linked were trying to hold them back from the gates. Right beside the gates, in a small group that was carefully shielded from the crowds by the police, stood the 5 famous children, together with their grown-ups who had come with them. A tall, bony old figure of Grandpa Joe could be seen standing quietly among them, and beside him, holding tightly onto his hand, was little Charlie Bucket himself. All the children except Charlie had both their mothers and fathers with them, and it was good thing that they had otherwise, the whole party might have gotten out of hand. They were so eager to get going that their parents were having to hold them back by forcing to prevent them from climbing over the gates. "Be patient," cried the fathers. "Be still. It's not time yet. It's not 10 o'clock. Behind them, Charlie Bucket could hear the shouts of the people in the crowd as they pushed and fought to get a glimpse of the famous children. "There's Violet B. R. Garde," he heard someone shouting. "That's her, all right. I can remember her face from the newspapers. And you know what?" somebody else shouted back. "She's still chewing that dreadful old piece of gum she's had for 3 months. You look at her jaws. They're still working on it. Who's the big fat boy? That's, I guess, the Gloop, so it is. Enormous, isn't he?" "Fantastic. Who's the kid with the picture of the Lone Ranger stenciled on his windbreaker?" "That's Mike TV. He's the television fiend. He must be crazy. Look at all those crazy pistols he got hanging all over him." "The one I want to see is Veruca Salt," shouted another voice in the crowd. "She's the girl whose father bought up 500,000 candy bars and then made the workers in the peanut factory unwrap every one of them until they found the golden ticket. He gives her anything she wants, absolutely anything. She only has to start screaming for it, and she gets it. Dreadful, isn't it? Shocking, I'd call it. Which do you think is her? That one over there on the left, the little girl in the silver mint coat. Which one is Charlie Bucket? Charlie Bucket? He must be that skinny little shrimp standing beside the old fellow who looks like a skeleton right close to us. Just that, see him? Why wasn't he got a coat on this winter day, when cool winter weather? Don't ask me. Maybe he can't afford to buy one. Jeepers! He must be freezing." Charlie, standing only a few paces away from the speaker, gave Grandpa Joe's hand a squeeze, and the old man looked down at Charlie and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, the church clock began striking 10. Very slowly, with a loud creaking of rusty hinges, the great iron gates of the factory began to swing open. The crowd became suddenly silent. The children stopped jumping about. All eyes were fixed upon the gates. "There he is!" somebody shouted. "That's him!" And so it was. Chapter 14. Mr. Willy Wonka. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of a beautiful plum-colored velvet. His trousers were bottle green. His gloves were pearly gray. And in one hand he carried a fine gold-topped walking cane. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat-pointed black beard, a goatee, and his eyes were most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And how clever he looked! How quick and sharp and full of light! He kept making jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that way, and taking everything in with those bright twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a quick, clever old squirrel from the park. Suddenly he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow. He spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered under the gates. And he called out, "Welcome, my little friends, welcome to the factory." His voice was high and fluttery. "Will you come forward one at a time, please?" he called out, "and bring your parents to then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" The big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Gloop," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you! Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice! Come in, come in. Let's just step through the gates." Mr. Wonka was clearly just as excited as everybody else. "My name," said the next child to go forward, "is Veruca Salt." "My dear Veruca, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a verruca was a sort of wart that you got on the sole of your foot. But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father, how are you, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Salt? Is overjoyed to see you. Yes, I think it's quite in order. Please go in." The next two children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined and then to have their arms practically pumped off their shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket." "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. Well, so there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" Yes, I read all about it in this morning's paper. Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad, so happy for you. And this, your grandfather?" "Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted." "All right, excellent. Is everybody in now?" "5 children. Yes, good. Now will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourself. I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings." "Oh, dear me, no." Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron gate slowly close behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took a last look at them. Then at the gate, as the gates closed with a clang, all the side of the outside world disappeared. "Here we are!" cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. "Through the big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory because of the workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outside in this weather. They'd freeze to death." "But who are these workers?" asked the guest a gloop. "All in good time, my dear boy," said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. "Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are all of you inside? Good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you." Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could easily have driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. "How lovely and warm," whispered Charlie. "I know, and what a marvelous smell," answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mint and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossoms and caramel and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy, as though some monstrous, gigantic machine were spinning its wheel at breakneck speed. "Now this, my dear children," said Mr. Wonka, raising his voice above the noise. "This is the main corridor. Will you please hang your coats and hats on those pegs over there, and then follow me? That's the way. Good. Everyone ready? Come on, then. Here we go." He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tail of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people. When you came to think of it, there were 9 grown-ups and 5 children, 14 in all. So you can imagine that there was a good deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. "Come on," cried Mr. Wonka. "Get a move on, please. We'll never get around today if you dawdle like this." Soon he turned right off the main corridor into another slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then left, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren, with passages leading this way and that in every direction. "Don't you let go of my hand," Charlie whispered Grandpa Joe. "Noticed how all these passages are sloping downwards," called Mr. Wonka. "We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in the factory are deep down below the surface." "Why is that?" somebody asked. "There wouldn't be nearly enough space for them up on top," answered Mr. Wonka. "These rooms we are going to see are enormous. They're larger than football fields. No building in the world would be enough to house them. But down here underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There's no limit so long as I hollow it out." Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly Mr. Wonka stopped in front of him. There was a shiny metal door. The party crowded round. On the door in large letters it said, "The Chocolate Room." Chapter 15. The Chocolate Room. "An important room, this," cried Mr. Wonka, taking a bunch of keys from his pocket and slipping one into the keyhole of the door. "This is the nerve center of the whole factory, the heart of the whole business, and so beautiful. I insist upon my rooms being beautiful. I can't abide ugliness in factories. In we go then. But do be careful, my dear children. Don't lose your head. Don't get overexcited. Keep very calm." Mr. Wonka opened the door. 5 children and 9 grown-ups pushed their ways in, and oh, what an amazing sight it was that now met their eyes. They were looking down upon a lovely valley. There were green meadows on either side of the valley, and along the bottom of it there flowed a great brown river. What is more, there was a tremendous waterfall. Water curled and rolled in a solid sheet, then went crashing down into a boiling, churning whirlpool of froth and spray. Below the waterfall, and this was the most astonishing sight of all, a whole mass of enormous glass pipes were dangling down into the river from somewhere high up in the ceilings. They really were enormous. Those pipes, there must have been a dozen of them at least, and they were sucking up the brownish, muddy water from the river and carrying it away to goodness nowhere. And because they were made of glass, you could see the liquid flowing and bubbling along inside them. And above the noise of the waterfall, you could hear the never-ending sucking sound of the pipes as they did their work. Graceful trees and bushes were growing along the river banks, weeping willow and alders, and tall clumps of rhododendrons with their pink and red mauve blossoms. In the meadows, there were thousands of buttercups. "There!" cried Mr. Wonka, dancing up and down, pointing his gold-topped cane at the great brown river. "It's all chocolate. Every drop of that water is not melted. Chocolate of the finest quality. the very finest quality. There's enough chocolate in there to fill every bathtub in the entire country, and all the swimming pools as well. Isn't it terrific? And just look at my pipes. They suck up the chocolate and carry it all away to all the other rooms in the factory where it is needed. Thousands of gallons an hour, my dear children. Thousands and thousands of gallons. The children and their parents were too flabbergasted to speak. They were staggered. They were dumbfounded. They were bewildered and dazzled. They were completely bowled by the hugeness of the whole thing. They simply stood and stared. The waterfall is most important, Mr. Wonka went on. It mixes the chocolate, it churns it up, it pounds it and beats it. It makes it light and frothy. No other factory in the world mixes its chocolate by waterfall. But it's the only way to do it properly. The only way. And do you like my trees? He cried, pointing with his stick, and my lovely bushes. Don't you think they look pretty? I told you I hated ugliness. And of course they are all eatable. All made of something different and delicious. And do you like my meadows? Do you like my grass and my buttercups? The grass you are standing on, my dear little ones, is made of new kind of stuffed minty sugar that I've just invented. I call it swudge. Try a blade. Please do. It's delectable. Automatically, everybody bent down and picked one blade of grass. Everybody, that is, except Augusta Gloop, who took a big handful, and Violet Gordy. Before tasting a blade of grass, she took the piece of record-breaking chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it carefully behind her ear. Isn't it wonderful? Whispered Charlie. Hasn't it got a wonderful taste, Grandpa? I could eat the whole field, said Grandpa Joe, grinning with delight. I could go on all fours like a cow and eat every blade of grass in the field. Try a buttercup, cried Mr. Wonka. They're even nicer. Suddenly, the air was filled with screams of excitement. The scream came from Veruca Sole. She was pointing frantically to the other side of the river. Look! Oh, look, over there! She screamed. What is it? He's moving. He's walking. It's a little person. It's a little man. Down below the river. Everybody stopped picking buttercups and stared across the river. She's right, Grandpa, cried Charlie. It is a little man. Can you see him? I see him, Charlie, said Grandpa Joe excitedly. And now everybody was started shouting at once. There's two of them. My gosh, so there is. There's more than two. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are they doing? Where did they come from? Who are they? Children and parents all alike rushed down to the edge of the river to get a closer look. Aren't they fantastic? No, higher than my knee. Look at their funny long hair, the tiny man. They were no larger than medium-sized doll. Had stopped what they were doing now, and they were staring back across the river at the visitors. One of them pointed towards the children, and then he whispered something to the other four, and all 5 of them burst into peals of laughter. But they can't be real people, Charlie said. Of course they're real people, Mr. Wonka answered. They're Oompa Loompas. Chapter 16. The Oompa Loompas. Oompa Loompas! Everyone said at once. Oompa Loompas! Imported direct from Loompa Land. said Mr. Wonka proudly. "There's no such place," said Miss Salt. "Excuse me, dear lady, but Mr. Wonka," cried Miss Salt, I am a teacher of geography." "Then you know all about it," said Mr. Wonka. "And oh, what a terrible country it is! Nothing but thick jungles infested by the most dangerous beasts in the entire world, hornswogglers and snoozewongers, and those terrible wicked wongdoodles. A wongdoodle and those terrible wicked wongadoodles. A wongadoodle would eat Oompa Loompas for breakfast and come galloping back for a second helping. And when I went out there, I found the little Oompa Loompas living in tree houses. They had to live in tree houses to escape from the wongadoodles and the hornswogglers and the snoozewongers, and they were practically starving to death. They were living on green caterpillar, and the caterpillar tasted revolting. Then the Oompa Loompas spent every moment of their days climbing through the treetops, looking for other things to mash up with the caterpillars to make them taste better. Red beetles, for instance, and eucalyptus leaves and the bark of the bong bong tree, all of them beastly, but not quite so beastly as the caterpillars. Poor little Oompa Loompas! The one food that they longed for more than any other was the cacao bean, but they couldn't get it. An Oompa Loompa was lucky if he found 3 or 4 cacao beans a year. But oh, how they craved them! They used to dream about cacao beans all night and talk about them all day. You had only to mention the word cacao to an Oompa Loompa, and he would start dribbling at the mouth. "The cacao bean," Mr. Wonka continued, "which grows on the cacao tree, happens to be the thing from which all chocolate is made. You cannot make chocolate without the cacao bean. The cacao bean is chocolate. I myself use billions of cacao beans every week in this factory. And so much, dear children, as soon as I discovered that Oompa Loompas were crazy for this particular food, I climbed up to the treehouse village and poked my head through the door of the treehouse belonging to the leader of the tribe. The poor little fellow looked thin and starved, and sitting there trying to eat a bowl full of mashed up green caterpillars without being sick. "Look here," I said, speaking not in English, of course, but in Oompa Loompish. "Look here, if you and all your people will come back to my country and live in my factory, you can all have all the cacao beans you want. I've got mountains of them in my storehouses. You can have cacao beans for every meal. You can gorge yourself silly on them. I'll even pay you weeks in cacao beans if you wish." "You really mean it?" asked the Oompa Loompa leader, leaping off from his chair. "Of course I mean it," I said. "And you can have chocolate as well. Chocolate tastes even better than cacao beans because it's got milk and sugar added." The little man gave a great whoop of joy and threw his bowl of mashed potatoes right out of the tree house window. "It's a deal!" he cried. "Come on, let's go. So ship them all over here, every man, woman, and children in the Oompa Loompa tribe." It was easy. I smuggled them over in a large packing cases with holes in them, and they all got here safely. They are wonderful workers. They all speak English now. They love dancing and music. They are always making up songs. Expect you will hear a good deal of singing today from time to time. I must warn you, though, they are rather mischievous. They like jokes. They will wear the same kind of clothes that they wore in the jungle. They insist upon that the men, as you can see for yourself across the river wear only deerskins. The women wear leaves, and the children wear nothing at all. The women use fresh leaves every day. Daddy, shouted Veruca, the girl who got everything she wanted. Daddy, I want an Oompa Loompa. I want you to get me an Oompa Loompa. I want an Oompa Loompa right away. I want to take it home with me. Go on, Daddy. Get me an Oompa Loompa. Now, my pet, her father said to her. We mustn't interrupt Mr. Wonka. But I want an Oompa Loompa, screamed Veruca. All right, Veruca, all right. But I can't get it for you this second. Please be patient. I'll see you have one before the day is out. Augustus, shouted Miss Gloop. Augustus, sweetheart, I think you had better do that. Augustus Gloop, as you might have guessed, that had quickly sneaked down the edge of the river, and he was nearly on the river bank, scooping hot melted chocolate into his mouth as fast as he could. Chapter 17. Augustus Gloop goes up the pipe. When Mr. Wonka turned around and saw what Augustus Gloop was doing, he cried out, "No, oh no, please, Augustus, please. I beg you not to do that. My chocolate must be untouched by human hands." "Augustus," called out Miss Gloop, "didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from that river at once." "This stuff is terrific," said Augustus, taking not the slightest notice of his mother or Mr. Wonka. "Oh boy, I need a bucket to drink it properly." "Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down, waggling his stick in the air, "you must come away. You are dirtying my chocolate." "Augustus!" cried Miss Gloop. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Gloop. Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his enormous stomach. He was now lying full length on the ground, and his head far out the river, lapping up the chocolate like a dog. "Augustus!" shouted Miss Gloop, "you'll be giving that nasty coat of yours to about 1,000,000 people all over the country." "Be careful, Augustus," shouted Mr. Gloop. "You're leaning too far out." Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek and then a splash, and into the river went Augustus Gloop, and in 1 second he had disappeared under the brown surface. "Save him!" screamed Miss Gloop, going white in the face and waving an umbrella about. "He'll drown! He can't swim a yard! Save him! Save him!" "Good heavens, woman," said Mr. Gloop. "I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on." Augustus Gloop's face came up to the surface, painted brown with chocolate. "Help! Help! Help!" he yelled. "Fish me out!" "Don't just stand there," Miss Gloop screamed at Mr. Gloop. "Do something." "I am doing something," said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. But while he was doing this, the wretched boy was being sucked closer and closer to the mouth of one of the great pipes that was dangling down into the river. Then all at once the powerful suction took hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface, then into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the riverbank waited breathlessly to see where he would come out. "There he goes!" somebody shouted, pointing upwards, and sure enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could be clearly seen shooting inside it, head first like a torpedo. "Help! Murder! Police!" screamed Miss Gloop. "Augustus, come back at once. Where are you going?" "It's a wonder to me," said Mr. Gloop, "how that pipe is big enough for him to go through it." "It isn't big enough," said Charlie Bucket. Oh dear, look, he's slowing down." "So he is," said Grandpa Joe. "He's going to stick," said Charlie. "I think he is," said Grandpa Joe. By golly, he is stuck," said Charlie. "It's his stomach that's done it," said Mr. Gloop. He's blocked the whole pipe, said Grandpa Joe. Smash the pipe, yelled Mr. Gloop, still waving her umbrella. Augustus, come out of there at once. The watchers below could see the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe. They could see it building up behind him in a solid mass, pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. Something did give, and that something was Augustus. Woof! Up he shot again, like a bullet in the barrel of a gun. He's disappeared, yelled Miss Glue. Where does that pipe to go? Quick, call the fire brigade. Keep calm, cried Mr. Wonka. Keep calm, my dear lady. Keep calm. There is no danger whatsoever. Augustus has gone on a little journey, that's all. A most interesting little journey. And he'll come out just fine. You wait and see. How can possibly come out just fine? Snapped Miss Gloop. He'll be made into marshmallow in 5 seconds. Impossible, cried Mr. Wonka. Mr. Wonka, unthinkable, inconceivable, absurd. He can never be made into marshmallows. And why not, may I ask, shouted Miss Glue? Because that pipe doesn't go to the marshmallow rooms, Mr. Wonka answered. It doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augusta went up, happens to lead directly to the room where I make a most delicious kind of strawberry flavored chocolate coated fudge. He'll be made into strawberry flavored chocolate coated fudge, screamed Miss Glue. My poor Augustus. They'll be selling him on the pound all over the country tomorrow morning. Quite right, said Mr. Glue. I know I'm right, said Miss Glue. It's beyond a joke, said Mr. Glue. Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think so, cried Miss Glue. Just look at him. He's laughing his head off. How dare you laugh like that when my boy's just gone up the pipe? You monster, she shrieked, pointing her umbrella at Mr. Wonka as though she were going to run him through. You think it's a joke, do you? You think that sucking my boy up into your fudge room like that is just one great big colossal joke? He'll be perfectly safe, said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. He'll be chocolate fudge, shrieked Miss Gloop. Never, cried Mr. Wonka. Of course he will, shrieked Miss Gloop. I wouldn't allow it, cried Mr. Wonka. And why not, shrieked Miss Gloop. Because that taste will be terrible, said Mr. Wonka. Just imagine it. Augustus flavored chocolate-coated Gloop. No one will buy it. They most certainly would, cried Mr. Gloop indignantly. I don't want to think about it, shrieked Miss Glue. Nor do I, said Mr. Wonka, and I do promise you, madam, that your darling boy is perfectly safe. If he's perfectly safe, then where is he? Snapped Miss Glue. Lead me to him this instant. Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his fingers sharply. Click, 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 3 times. Immediately, an Oompa Loompa appeared as if from nowhere and stood beside him. The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white. His long hair was golden brown, and the top of his head came just above the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung over his shoulder. Now listen to me, said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. I want you to take Mr. and Miss Gloop up to the fudge room and help them find the son, Augustus. He's just gone up the pipe. The Oompa Loompa took one look at Miss Gloop and exploded into peals of laughter. Oh, do it quiet. Oh, do be quiet, said Mr. Wonka. Control yourself. Pull yourself together. Miss Gloop doesn't think it at all funny. You can say that thing again. See, you can see that again, said Miss Gloop. Go straight to the fudge room, Mr. Wonka said to the Oompa Loompa, and when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside the big chocolate mixing barrel. It's most certainly you'll find him in there. But you better look sharp. You'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's liable to get pulled out into the fudge boiler, and that really would be a disaster, wouldn't it? The fudge wouldn't be quite uneatable. Miss Gloop let out a shriek of fury. I'm joking, said Mr. Wonka, giggling madly behind his beard. I didn't mean it. Forgive me. I'm so sorry. Goodbye, Miss Gloop and Mr. Gloop. Goodbye. I'll see you later. As Mr. and Miss Gloop and the tiny escort hurried away, the 5 Oompa Loompas on the far side of the river suddenly began hopping and dancing around about the beating wildly upon a number of very small drums. Against this Gloop, they chanted. Against this Gloop. Against this Gloop. Against this Gloop. Grandpa, said Charlie. Listen to them, Grandpa. What are they doing? Shh, whispered Grandpa Jill. I think they're going to sing us a song. Against this Gloop, chanted the Oompa Loompas. Against this Gloop. Against this Gloop. The great big greedy nincompoop. How long could we allow this beast to gorge and guzzle, feed and feast, and on everything he wanted to? Great Scott, it simply wouldn't do. However long this pig might live, yet positive he'd never give even the smallest bit of fun and happiness to anyone. So what we do in cases such as this, we use the gentle touch, and carefully we take the brat and turn him into something that will give great pleasure to us all. A doll, for instance, or a ball, or marbles, or a rocking horse. But this revolting boy, of course, was so unutterably vile, so greedy, full, and infantile. He left a most disgusting taste inside our mouths, and so in haste we chose a thing, come what may, would take the nasty taste away. Come on, he cried, the time is ripe to send him shooting up the pipe. He has to go, it has to be. And very soon he's going to see inside the room to which he's gone. Some funny things are going on. But don't you children be alarmed. I guess this Gloop will not be harmed. Although, of course, we must admit he'll be altered quite a bit. He'll be quite changed from what he's been when he goes through the fudge machine. Slowly the wheels go around and around. The cogs begin to grind and pound. The 100 knives will slice. We add some sugar, cream, and spice. We boil him for a minute more until we're absolutely sure that all the green and all the gas is boiled away for once and all. Then out he comes, and now by grace a miracle has taken place. This boy who only just before was loathed by men from shore to shore, this greedy brute, this house-louse's ear, is loved by people everywhere. For who could hate or bear a grudge against the loosest bit of fudge? I told you they loved singing, cried Mr. Wonka. Aren't they delightful? Aren't they charming? But you mustn't believe a word they said. It's all nonsense, every bit of it. Are the Oompa Loompas really joking, Grandpa? Asked Charlie. Of course they're joking, answered Grandpa Joe. They must be joking at least. I hope they're joking, don't you? Chapter 18. Down the Chocolate River. Off we go, cried Mr. Wonka. Hurry up, everybody. Follow me to the next room, and please don't worry about this Gloop. He's bound to come out in the wash. They always do. We shall have to make the next part of the journey by boat. Here she comes. Look, a steamy mist was rising up now from the great warm chocolate river, and now of the mist there appeared suddenly a most fantastic pink boat. It was a large, open rowboat with a tall front and a tall back, like a Viking boat of old, and it was of such a shiny, sparkling, glistening pink color that the whole thing looked as though if it were made of bright pink glass. There were many oars on either side of it, and as the boat came closer, the watchers on the river banks could see that the oars were being pulled by masses of Oompa Loompas, at least 10 of them to each oar. "This is my private yacht," cried Mr. Wonka, beaming with pleasure. "I made her by hollowing out an enormous board suite. Isn't she beautiful? See how she comes cutting through the river." The gleaming pink board suite boat glided up to the riverbank. 100 Oompa Loompas rested on their oars and stared up at the visitors. They suddenly, for some reason best known to themselves, they all burst into shrieks of laughter. "What's so funny?" asked Violent B.R.A. Gorday. "Oh, don't worry about them," cried Mr. Wonka. "They're always laughing. They think everything's a colossal joke. Jump into the boat, all of you. Come on, hurry up." As soon as everyone was safe in the Oompa Loompas pushed the boat away from the bank and began to row swiftly down the river. "Hey there, my TV!" shouted Mr. Wonka. "Please do not lick the boat. Please do not lick the boat with your tongue. It'll only make it sticky." "Daddy," said Veruca, "I want a boat like this. I want you to buy me a big, pink, bold, sweet boat exactly like Mr. Wonka's. And I want lots of Oompa Loompas to row me about. And I want a chocolate river, and I want..." "She wants a good kick in the pants," whispered Grandpa Joe to Charlie. The old man was sitting in the back of the boat, and little Charlie Bucket was sitting right beside him. Charlie was holding tightly onto his grandfather's bony old hand. He was in a whirl of excitement. Everything that he had seen so far, the great chocolate river, the waterfall, the huge sucking pipes, the candy meadows, the Oompa Loompas, the beautiful pink boat, and most of all, Mr. Willy Wonka himself had been so astonishing that he began to wonder whether there could possibly be any more astonishments left. What were they going now? Where were they going now? What were they going to see? And what in the world was going to happen in the next room? "Isn't it marvelous?" said Grandpa Joe, grinning at Charlie. Charlie nodded and smiled up at the old man. Suddenly Mr. Wonka was sitting on Charlie's other side, reached down into the bottom of the boat, picked up a large mug, dipped it into the river, filled it with chocolate, and handed it to Charlie. "Drink this," he said. It'll do you good. You looked starved to death." And then Mr. Wonka filled the second mug and gave it to Grandpa Joe. "You too," he said. "You look like a skeleton. What's the matter? Hasn't there been anything to eat in your house lately?" "Not much," said Grandpa Joe. Charlie put the mug to his lips, and as the rich, warm, creamy chocolate ran down his throat into his empty tummy, his whole body from head to toe began to tingle with pleasure, and a feeling of intense happiness spread over him. "You like it?" asked Mr. Wonka. "Oh, it's wonderful," Charlie said. "The creamiest, loveliest chocolate I've ever tasted," said Grandpa Joe, smacking his lips. "That's because it's been mixed by waterfall," Mr. Wonka told him. The boat sped on down the river. The river was getting narrower. There was some kind of a dark tunnel ahead, a great round tunnel that looked like an enormous pipe, and the reapers was running right into the tunnel, and so was the boat. Row on, shouted Mr. Wonka, jumping up and waving his stick in the air. Full speed ahead! Mr. Oompa Loompas rowing faster than ever. The boat shot into the pitch-dark tunnel, and all the passengers screamed with excitement. How can they see where they're going? Shrieked Violet. Be out a guard day in the darkness. There's no knowing where they're going, cried Mr. Wonka, hooting with laughter. There's no earthly way of knowing which direction they are going. There's no knowing where they are rowing, or which way the river's flowing. Not a speck of light is showing. So the danger must be growing, for the rowers keep on rowing, and they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing. He's gone off his rocker, shouted one of the fathers aghast, and the other parents joined in the chorus of frightened shouting. He's crazy, they shouted. He's balmy, he's nutty, he's screwy, he's batty, he's Debbie, he's daddy, he's daffy, he's goofy, he's beany, he's buggy, he's wacky, he's loony. No, he is not, said Grandpa Joe. Switch on the lights, shouted Mr. Wonka, and suddenly on came the lights. The whole tunnel was brilliantly lit up, and Charlie could see that they were indeed inside a gigantic pipe, and the great upward curving walls of the pipe were pure white and spotlessly clean. The river of the chocolate was flowing very fast inside the pipe, and the Oompa Loompas were all rolling like crazy, and the boat was rocketing along at a furious pace. Mr. Wonka was jumping up and down in the back of the boat, and calling to the rowers to row faster and faster. Still, he seemed to love the sensation of whizzing through a white tunnel in a pink boat on a chocolate river, and he clapped his hands and laughed, and kept glancing at his passengers to see if they were enjoying it as much as he. Look, Grandpa, cried Charlie. There's a door in the wall. It was a green door, and it was set into the wall of the tunnel, just above the level of the river. As they flashed past it, the door, there was just enough time to read the writing on the door. Storeroom number 54. It said old-time creams, dairy creams, whipped creams, walnut cream, coffee cream, pineapple cream, vanilla cream, and hair cream. Hair cream, cried Mike Teavee. You don't use hair cream. Row on, shouted Mr. Wonka. There's no time to ask silly questions. They streaked past a black door, storeroom number 71. It said on it, whips all shapes and sizes. Whips? Cried Veruca Salt. What on earth do you use whips for? For whipping cream, of course, said Mr. Wonka. How can you whip cream without whips? Whipped cream isn't whipped cream at all unless it's been whipped with whips. Just as a poached egg isn't a poached egg unless it's been stolen from the wood in the dead of night. Row on, please. They passed a yellow door on which it said storeroom number 7. Other beans, cacao beans, coffee beans, jelly beans, and has-beens. Has-beens, cried Violet B.R.A. Garday. You're once yourself, said Mr. Wonka. There's no time for arguing. Press on, press on. Just 5 seconds later, when a bright red door came into sight ahead, he suddenly waved his gold-topped cane in the air and shouted, Stop the boat! Chapter 19. The Inventing Room, Everlasting Gobstoppers and Hair Toffee. When Mr. Wonka shouted, Stop the boat, the Oompa Loompas jammed the oars into the river and backed to water furiously. The boat stopped. The Oompa Loompas guided the boat alongside the red door. On the door it said, Inventing Room, Private, Keep Out. Mr. Wonka took a key from his pocket, leaned over the side of the boat, and put the key in the keyhole. This is the most important room in the entire factory, he said. All the most secret new inventions are cooking and simmering in here. Old Fickle Grubber would give his front teeth to be allowed inside just for 3 minutes. So would Prawn-Nose and Slugworth and all the other rotten chocolate makers. But now, listen to me. I want no messing about when you go in. No touching, no meddling, and no tasting. Is that agreed? Yes, yes, the children cried. We won't touch anything. Touch a thing. Up to now, Mr. Wonka said, nobody else, not even an Oompa Loompa, has ever been allowed in here. He opened the door and stepped out of the boat into the room. The 4 children, their parents, all scrambled after him. Don't touch, shouted Mr. Wonka, and don't knock anything over. Charlie Bucket stared around the gigantic room in which he found himself. The place was like a witch's kitchen. All about him, black metal pots were boiling and bubbling on huge stoves, and kettles were hissing, and pans were sizzling, and strange iron machines were clanking and spluttering, and there were pipes running all over the ceiling wall, and the whole place was filled with smoke and steam and delicious, rich smells. Mr. Wonka himself had suddenly become even more excited than usual, and everyone could see that this was the room he loved best of all. He was hopping about among the saucepans and the machines like a child among his Christmas presents, not knowing which thing to look at. First, he lifted the lid from the huge pot and took a sniff. Then he rushed over and dipped a finger in a barrel of sticky yellow stuff and had a taste. Then he skipped across to one of the machine and turned half a dozen knobs this way and that. Then he peered anxiously around the glass door of a gigantic oven, rubbing his hands and cackling with delight at what he saw inside. Then he ran over to another machine, a small shiny affair that kept going. Fut, 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 fut. And every time it went fut, a large green marble dropped out of it into a basket on the floor. At least it looked like a marble. Everlasting gobstopper, cried Mr. Wonka proudly. They're completely new. I am inventing them for children who are given very little pocket money. You can give an everlasting gobstopper in your mouth, and you can suck it and suck it and suck it and suck it and suck it, and it will never get any smaller. It's like gum, cried Violet Beauregarde. It is not like gum, said Mr. Wonka said. The gum is for chewing, and if you try chewing one of these gobstoppers, you'd break your teeth off, but they taste terrific, and they change color once a week, and they never get any smaller. They never disappear. Never. At least I don't think they do. There's one of them being tested this moment in the testing room next door. A Oompa Loompa is sucking it. He's been sucking on it for very nearly a year now without stopping, and it's still just as good as ever. Now over here, Mr. Wonka went on, skipping excitedly across the room to the opposite wall. Over here, I am inventing a completely new line in toffees. He stopped beside a large saucepan. The saucepan was full of thick, gooey purplish treacle, boiling and bubbling by standing on his toes. Little Charlie could see inside it. That's hair coffee, cried Mr. Wonka. You eat just one tiny bit of that, and in exactly half an hour, a brand new, luscious, sticky, silky, beautiful crop of hair will start growing out all over the top of your hair, and a mustache and a beard. A beard, cried Veruca. Who wants a beard, for heaven's sake? It wouldn't suit you very well, said Mr. Wonka, but unfortunately the mixture is not quite right. Yet I've got it too strong. It works too well. I tried it on an Oompa Loompa yesterday in the testing room, and immediately a huge beard started shooting out of his chin, and the beard grew so fast that soon it was trailing all over the floor in thick hair carpet. It was growing faster than we could cut it. In the end, we had to use a lawnmower to keep it in check, but I'll get the mixture right soon. And when I do, then there'll be no excuse anymore for little boys and girls about what with bald heads. Mr. Wonka, said Mike TV, little boys and girls never do go about with. Don't argue, my dear children. Please don't argue, cried Mr. Wonka. It's such a waste of precious time. Now, over here, if you all will all step this way, I will show you something that I am terrifically proud of. Only do be careful. Don't knock anything over. Stand back. Chapter 20. The Great Gum Machine. Mr. Wonka led the party over to a gigantic machine that stood in the center of the inventing room. It was a mountain of gleaming metal that towered high above the children and their parents. Out of the very top of it, there sprouted hundreds and hundreds of thin glass tubes, and the glass tubes all curled downwards and came together in a bunch and hung suspended over an enormous round tub as big as a bath. Here we go, cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed 3 different buttons on the side of the machine. A second later, a mighty rumbling sound came from inside it, and the whole machine began to shake most frightening. The steam began hissing out of it all over, and then suddenly the watchers noticed that runny stuff was pouring down the insides of all hundreds of little glass tubes and squirting out into the great tub below. So that all the colors of the rainbow and many other colors as well came sloshing and splashing into the tub. It was a lovely sight, and when the tub was nearly full, Mr. Wonka pressed another button, and immediately the running stuff stopped running out of the tubes, and the rumbling sound disappeared, and a wheezing, roaring noise took its place, and then a giant wizard started wheezing around inside the enormous tub, mixing up all the different colored liquids like an ice cream soda. Gradually, the mixture became to froth. It became frothier and frothier, and it turned from blue to white to green to brown to yellow, then back to blue again. Watch, said Mr. Wonka. Click went the machine, and the wizard stopped wheezing. And now there was a short sort of sucking noise, and very quickly all the blue frothy mixture in the huge basin was sucked back into the stomach of the machine. There was a moment of silence. Then a few queer rumblings were heard. Then silence. Then suddenly the machine let out a monstrous, mighty groan, and at the same moment, a tiny drawer, no bigger than the drawer in a sloth machine, popped out the side of the machine, and in the drawer there lay something so small and thin and gray that everyone thought it must be a mistake. The thing looked like a little strip of gray cardboard. The children and their parents stared at the little gray strip lying in the drawer. You mean that's all? Said Mike TV, disgusted. That's all, answered Mr. Wonka. Mr. Wonka gazing proudly at the result. Do you think you know what it is? There was a pause. Then suddenly, Violet Garday, the goofy gum-chewing girl, let out a yell of excitement. By gum! It's gum! She shrieked. It's a stick of chewing gum. Right, you are, cried Mr. Wonka, slapping Violet hard on the back. It's a stick of gum. It's a stick of the most amazing and fabulous and sensational gum in the world. Chapter 21. Goodbye, Violet. The gum, Mr. Wonka went on, is the latest, my greatest, my most fascinating invention. It's a chewing gum meal. It's that tiny little strip of gum lying there in a whole 3-course dinner all by itself. What sort of nonsense is this? Said one of the fathers. My dear sir, cried Mr. Wonka, when I start selling this gum in the shops, I'll change everything. It'll be end of all kitchens and all cookings. There'll be no more marketing to do, no more buying of meat and groceries. There'll be no knives and forks at meal times, no plates, no washing, no garbage, no mess. Just a little strip of Wonka's magic chewing gum, and that's all you ever need at breakfast, lunch, and supper. This piece of gum I just made happened to be a tomato soup, roast beef, and blueberry pie, but you can have almost anything you want. What do you mean it's tomato soup, roast beef, and blueberry pie? Said Violet B.R.A. If you were to start chewing it, said Mr. Wonka, then that is exactly what you would get on the menu. It's absolutely amazing. You can actually feel the food going down your throat and into your tummy, and you can taste it perfectly, and it fills you up. It satisfies you. It's terrific. So it's utterly impossible, said Veruca. So just so long as it's gum, shouted Violet B.R.A. Just so long as it's a piece of gum and I can chew it. That's for me. And quickly she took her own world record piece of chewing gum out of her mouth and stuck it behind her left ear. Come on, Mr. Wonka, she said. Hand over this magic gum of yours and we'll see if it works. Now, Violet, said Miss B.R.A. her mother, let's do this anything silly, Violet. I want the gum, Violet said obstinately. What's so silly? I would rather you didn't take it, Mr. Wonka told her gently. You see, I haven't got it quite right yet. There are still one or two things. Oh, to heck with that, said Violet, and suddenly, before Mr. Wonka could stop her, she shot out a fat hand and grabbed a stick of gum out of the little drawer and popped into her mouth at once. Her huge, well-trained jaw started chewing away on it like a pair of tongues. Don't, said Mr. Wonka. Fabulous, shouted Violet. It's tomato soup. It's hot and creamy and delicious. I can feel it running down my throat. Stop, said Mr. Wonka. The gum isn't ready yet. It's not yet right. Of course it's right, said Violet. It's working beautifully. Oh my, what lovely soup this is. Spit it out, said Mr. Wonka. Spit it. It's changing, shouted Violet, chewing and grinning, both at the same time. The second course is coming up. It's roast beef. It's tender and juicy. Oh boy, what a flavor. The baked potato is marvelous too. It's got a crispy skin and it's all filled with butter inside. But now, interesting, Violet, said Mr. B.R.A. You are a clever girl. Keep chewing, kiddo, said Mr. B.R.E. Keep right on chewing, baby. This is a great day for the B.R.A. Gordies. Our little girl is the first person in the world to have a chewing gum meal. Everybody was watching Violet B.R.E. as she stood there chewing the extraordinary gum. Little Charlie Bucket was staring at her, absolutely spellbound, watching her huge rubbery lips as they pressed and unpressed with the chewing, and Grandpa Joe stood beside him, gaping at the girl. Mr. Wonka was wringing his hand and saying, "No, no, 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 it's not ready for eating. It's not right. You mustn't do it." "Blueberry pie and cream," shouted Violet. "Here it comes. Oh my, it's perfect. It's beautiful. It's exactly as though I'm swallowing it. It's as though I'm swallowing great big spoonfuls of the most marvelous blueberry pie in the world." "Good heavens, girl!" shrieked Mr. Bjorn suddenly staring at Violet. "What's happened to your nose?" "Oh, be quiet, Mom, and let me finish," said Violet. "It's turning blue," said Miss Bjorn. "Your nose is turning blue as blueberry." "Your mom is right," shouted Mr. Bjorn. "Your whole nose has gone purple." "What do you mean?" said Violet, still chewing away. "Your cheeks," screamed Miss Bjorn. "They're turning blue as well. So is your chin. Your whole face is turning blue." "Spit the gum out at once," ordered Mr. Bjorn. "Mercy, save us," yelled Miss Bjorn. "The girl's going blue and purple all over. Even her hair is changing color. Violet, you're turning violet. What is happening to you?" "I told you I hadn't got it quite right," said Mr. Wonka, shaking his head sadly. "I say you haven't," cried Miss B.R.E. "Just look at the girl now." Everybody was staring at Violet, and what a terrible, peculiar sight she was. Her face and hands and legs and neck, in fact, the skin all over her body, as well as her great big mop of curly hair, had turned a brilliant purplish blue, the color of blueberry juice. It always goes wrong when we come to the dessert," sighed Mr. Wonka. "It's the blueberry pie that does it. But I'll get it right one day. You wait and see." "Violet!" screamed Miss B.R.E. "You're swelling up." "I feel sick," Violet said. "You're swelling up," screamed Miss B.R.E. again. "I feel most peculiar," gasped Violet. "I'm not surprised," said Mr. Beauty. "Great heavens, girl!" shrieked Miss Beauty. "You're blowing up like a balloon." "Like a blueberry," said Mr. Wonka. "Call a doctor," shouted Mr. Beauty. "Prick her with a pin," said one of the other fathers. "Save her!" cried Miss Beauty, wringing her hands. But there was no saving her now. Her body was swelling up and changing shape at such a rate that within a minute it had turned into nothing else than an enormous, round, huge blue ball, a gigantic blueberry, in fact, and all that remained of Violet Beauty herself was a tiny pair of legs and a tiny pair of arms sticking out of this great round fruit, and a little head on top. "It always happens like that," said Mr. Wonka. "I've tried it 20 times in the testing room on 20 Oompa Loompas, and every one of them finished up as a blueberry. It's most annoying. I just can't stand it. But I don't want a blueberry for a daughter," yelled Miss Beauty. "Put her back to what she was this instant." Mr. Wonka clicked his fingers, and 10 Oompa Loompas appeared immediately at his side. "Roll Miss Beauty into the boat," he said to them, "and take her along to the juicing room at once." "The juicing room?" cried Miss Beauty. "What are they going to do with her there?" "Squeeze her," said Mr. Wonka. "We've got to squeeze the juice out of her immediately. After that, we'll just have to see how she comes out. But don't worry, my dear Miss Beauty. We'll get her repaired if it's the last thing we do. I'm sorry about it all. I really am. Already the 10 Oompa Loompas were rolling the enormous blueberry across the floor of the inventing room toward the door that led to the chocolate river, where the boat was waiting. Mr. and Miss Beer Gorday hurried after them. The rest of the party, including little Charlie Bucket and Grandpa Joe, stood absolutely still and watched them go. Listen, whispered Charlie. Listen, Grandpa, the Oompa Loompas in the boat outside are starting to sing. The voices, one under them singing together, came loud and clear into the room. Dear friends, we surely all agree there's almost nothing worse to see than a repulsive little bum who's always chewing gum. It's very near as bad as those who sit around and pick the nose. So please believe us when we say that chewing gum will never pay. The sticky habit's bound to send the chewer to a sticky end. Did any of you ever know a person called Miss Bigelow? This dreadful woman saw no wrong in chewing all day long. She chewed while bathing in the tub. She chewed while dancing at her club. She chewed in church and on the bus. It really was quite ludicrous. And when she couldn't find her gum, she chewed up the linoleum or anything about what happened near a pair of boots, the postman's ear, or other people's underclothes, and once she chewed her boyfriend's nose. She went on chewing till at last her chewing muscles grew so vast that from her face her giant chin stuck out just like a violin. For years and years she chewed away, consuming 50 packs a day, until one summer's eve, as the horrid business came to pass, Miss Bigelow went to bed. For half an hour she lay and read, chewing all the while like some great clockwork crocodile. At last she put her gum away upon a special little tray, and set it back and went to sleep. She managed this by counting sheep. But now, how strange, although she slept, those massive jaws of hers still kept on chewing through the night. Even with nothing there to bite, they were, you see, in such a groove. They positively had to move, and very grim it was to hear. In pitch darkness, loud and clear, the sleeping woman's great big trap opening and shutting, snap, 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 faster and faster, chop, chop, chop. The noise went on, and it wouldn't stop, until at last her jaws decided to pause and open extra wide. With the most tremendous chew, they bit the lady's tongue in two. Thereafter, just from chewing gum, Miss Bigelow was also dumb and spent her life shut up in some disgusting sanatorium, and that is why we'll try so hard to save Miss Violet Beauregard from suffering an equal fate. She's still quite young. It's not too late, provided she survives the cure. We hope she does. We can't be sure. Chapter 22. Along the corridor. Well, 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 sighed Mr. Willy Wonka. 2 other little children gone. 3 good little children left. I think we'd better get out of this room quickly before we lose anyone else, Mr. Wonka said. But Mr. Wonka, said Charlie Bucket anxiously, will Violet Beauregard ever be all right again, or will she always be a blueberry? They'll de-juice her in no time flat, declared Mr. Wonka. They'll roll her into the de-juicing machine, and she'll come out just as thin as a whistle. But she still will be blue all cover, asked Charlie. She will be purple, She'll be purple, cried Mr. Wonka, and found rich purple from head to toe. But there you are. That's what comes from chewing disgusting gum all day long. If you think gum is so disgusting, said my TV, then why do you make it in your factory? I do wish you wouldn't mumble, said Mr. Wonka. I can't hear what you're saying. Come on, off we go. Hurry up, follow me. We're going into the corridors again. And so saying, Mr. Wonka scuttled across to the far end of the inventing room and went out through a small secret door hidden behind a lot of pipes and stoves. The three remaining children, Veruca Salt, my TV, and Charlie Bucket, together with the 5 remaining grown-ups, followed after him. Charlie Bucket saw that they were now back in one of those long pink corridors, with many other pink corridors leading out of it. Mr. Wonka was rushing along in front, turning left and right and right and left. And Grandpa Joe was saying, "Keep a good hold on my hand, Charlie. It will be terrible to get lost in here." Mr. Wonka was saying, "No time for any more messing about. We'll never get anywhere at the rate we've been going." And on he rushed down the endless pink corridor, with his black top hat perched on the top of his head and his plum-colored velvet coat-tails flying out behind him like a flag in the wind. They passed another door and then another and another. There were doors every 20 paces or so along the corridor now, and they all had something written on them, and strange clanking noises were coming from behind several of them, and delicious smells came wafting through the keyholes, and sometimes little jets of colored steam shot out of it from the cracks underneath. Grandpa Joe and Charlie were half running and half walking to keep up with Mr. Wonka, but they were able to read what it said on quite a few of the doors. As they hurried by, "Ito marshmallow pillows," it said on one. "Marshmallow pillows are terrific," shouted Mr. Wonka as he dashed by. "They'll be all the rage when I get them into the shops. No time to go in, though. No time to go in. Lucky lickable wallpaper for nurseries," it said on the next door. "Lovely stuff, lickable wallpaper," cried Mr. Wonka, rushing past. "It has pictures of fruits on it: bananas, apples, oranges, grapes, pineapples, strawberries, and snozberries." "Snozberries," said Mike TV. "Don't interrupt," said Mr. Wonka. "The wallpaper has pictures of all these fruits printed on it, and when you lick the picture of a banana, it tastes of banana. When you lick a strawberry, it tastes of strawberry. And when you lick a snozberry, it tastes just like a snozberry. What does a snozberry taste like?" "You're mumbling again," said Mr. Wonka. "Speak louder next time." "Oh, on we go. Hurry up. Hot ice creams for cold days," it said on the next door. "Extremely useful in winter," said Mr. Wonka, rushing on. "Hot ice cream warms you up no end in freezing weather. I also make hot ice cubes for putting in hot drinks. Hot ice cubes make hot drinks hotter. Cows that give chocolate milk," it said on the next door. "Ah, my pretty little cows," cried Mr. Wonka. "How I love those cows." "But why can't we see them?" asked Veruca Salt. "Why do we have to go rushing on past all these lovely rooms?" "We shall stop in time," scrawled Mr. Wonka. "Don't be so madly impatient. Fizzing little lifting drinks," it said on the next door. "Oh, those are fabulous," cried Mr. Wonka. "They fill you with bubbles, and the bubbles are full of a special kind of gas, and this gas is so terrific lifting that it lifts you right off the ground just like a balloon, and up you go until your head hits the ceiling, and there you stay. But how do you come down again? Asked little Charlie. You do a burp, of course, said Mr. Wonka. You do a great, big, long, rude burp and comes up. Up comes the gas, and down comes you. But don't drink it outdoors. There's no knowing how high up you'll be carried if you do that. I gave some to an old Oompa Loompa once out in the backyard, and he went up and up and up and disappeared out of the sight. It was very sad. I never saw him again. He should have burped, Charlie said. Of course he should have burped, said Mr. Wonka. I stood there shouting, "Burp, you silly ass, burp, or you'll never come down again." But he didn't or couldn't or wouldn't. I don't know which. Maybe he was too polite. He must be on the moon by now. On the next door it said, "Square candies that look round." "Wait," cried Mr. Wonka, skidding suddenly to a halt. "I'm very proud of my square candies that look round. Let's take a peek." Chapter 23. Square candies that look round. Everybody stopped and crowded to the door. The half of the room of the door was made of glass. Grandpa Joe lifted Charlie up so that he could get a better view, and looking in, Charlie saw a long table, and on the long table were rows and rows of small, white, square-shaped candies. The candies looked very much like square sugar lumps, except that each of them had a funny little pink face painted on one side. At the end of the table, a number of Oompa Loompas were busily painting more faces on more candies. "There you are," cried Mr. Wonka. "Square candies that look round." "They don't look round to me," said my TV. "They look square," said Veruca. "They look completely square." "But they are square," said Mr. Wonka. "I never said they weren't." "You said they were round," said Veruca Salt. "I never said anything of the sort," said Mr. Wonka. "I said they looked round." "But they don't look round," said Veruca Salt. "They look square." "They look round," insisted Mr. Wonka. "They most certainly do not look round," cried Veruca Salt. "Veruca, darling," said Miss Salt, "pay no attention to Mr. Wonka. He's lying to you." "But the old fish," said Mr. Wonka. "Go and boil your head." "How dare you speak to me like that?" shouted Miss Salt. "Oh, do shut up," said Mr. Wonka. "Now watch this." He took a key from his pocket and unlocked the door and flung it open. And suddenly, at the sound of the door opening, all the rows and rows of little squares candies looked quickly round to see who was coming in. The tiny pieces actually turned toward the door and stared at Mr. Wonka. "There you are," he said triumphantly. "They're looking round. There's no argument about it. They are square candies that look round." "By golly, he's right," said Mr. Grandpa Joe. "Come on," said Mr. Wonka, starting off down the corridor again. "On we go. We mustn't dawdle." "Butterscotch and buttergin," he said on the next door they passed. "Now that sounds a bit more interesting," said Mr. Salt, Veruca's father. "Glorious stuff," said Mr. Wonka. "The Oompa Loompas all adore it. It makes them tiddly. Listen, you can hear them in there now, whooping it up." Shrieks of laughter and snatches of singing could be heard coming through the closed door. "They're drunk as lords," said Mr. Wonka. "They're drinking butterscotch and soda. They like the best of all. Buttergin and tonic is also very popular. Follow me, please. We really mustn't keep stopping like this." He turned left. He turned right. They came to a long flight of stairs. Mr. Wonka slid down the banisters, and 3 children did the same. Miss Salt and Miss TV, the only woman now left in the pantry, were getting very out of breath. Miss Saw was a great fat creature with short legs, and she was blowing like a rhinoceros. "This way," cried Mr. Wonka, turning left at the bottom of the stairs. "Go slower," panted Miss Salt. "Impossible," said Mr. Wonka. "We should never get there in time if I did." "Get where?" said Veruca Salt. "Never you mind," said Mr. Wonka. "You wait and see. You just wait and see." Chapter 24. Veruca in the Nut Room. Mr. Wonka rushed on down the corridor next to the nut room and said on the right. The next door they came to. "All right," said Mr. Wonka. "Stop here for a moment and catch your breath and take a peek through the glass panel of this door. But don't go in. Whatever you do, don't go into the nut room. If you go in, you'll disturb the squirrels." Everyone crowded around the door. "Oh, look, Grandpa, look!" cried Charlie. "Squirrels!" shouted Veruca Salt. "Jeepers!" said Mike's TV. It was an amazing sight. 100 squirrels were seated upon high stools around a large table. On the table, there were mounds and mounds of walnuts, and the squirrels were all working like a mad, shelling the walnuts at a tremendous speed. "These squirrels especially trained for getting the nuts out of the walnuts," Mr. Wonka explained. "Why use squirrels?" Mike TV asked. "Why not use Oompa Loompas?" "Because," said Mr. Wonka, "Oompa Loompas can't get walnuts out of walnut shells in one piece. They always break them in two. Nobody except squirrels can get walnuts whole out of walnut shells every time. It is extremely difficult, but in my factory, I insist upon using only whole walnuts. Therefore, I have to have squirrels to do the job. Aren't they wonderful? The way they get those nuts out, and see how they first tap each walnut with their knuckles to be sure it's not a bad one. If it's bad, it makes a hollow sound, and don't bother to open it. They just throw it down the garbage chute. There, look, watch that squirrel nearest to us. I think he's got a bad one now." They watched the little squirrel as he tapped the walnut shell with his knuckles. He cocked his head to one side, listening intently. Then suddenly he threw the nut over his shoulder into the large hole in the floor. "Hey, Mummy!" shouted Veruca Salt suddenly. "I have decided I want a squirrel. Get me one of those squirrels." "Don't be silly, sweetheart," said Miss Salt. "These all belong to Mr. Wonka." "I don't care about that," shouted Veruca. "I want one. All I've got at home is 2 ducks and 4 cats and 6 bunny rabbits and 2 parakeets and 3 canaries and a green parrot and a turtle and a bowl of goldfish and a cage of white mice and a silly old hamster. I want a squirrel." "All right, my pets," Miss Salt said smoothly. "Mummy will get you a squirrel just as soon as she possibly can." "But I don't want any old squirrel," Veruca shouted. "I want a trained squirrel." At this point, Mr. Salt, Veruca's mother, stepped forward. "Very well, Wonka," he said importantly, taking out a wallet full of money. "How much do you want for one of these crazy squirrels? Name your price." "They're not for sale," Mr. Wonka answered. "She can't have one." "Who says I can't?" shouted Veruca. "I'm going in to grab me a squirrel this very minute." "Don't," said Mr. Wonka quickly, but he was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door and rushed in. The moment she entered the room, 100 squirrels stopped what they were doing and turned their heads and stared at her with small black beady eyes. Veruca stopped also and stared back at them, and then her gaze fell upon a pretty little squirrel sitting nearest to her at the end of the table. The squirrel was holding a walnut in its paws. "All right," Veruca said. "I'll have you." She reached out her hands to grab the squirrel, but as she did, in that first split second, when her hands started to go forward, there was a sudden flash of movement in the room, like a flash of brown lightning, and every single squirrel around the table took a flying leap toward her and landed on her body. 25 of them caught hold of her right arm and pinned it down. 25 more caught hold of her left arm and pinned that down. 25 got hold of her right foot and anchored it to the ground. 24 got hold of her left leg, and the one remaining squirrel, obviously the leader of them all, climbed up on her shoulder and stood tapping the wretched girl's head with his knuckles. "Save her!" screamed Miss Salt. "Veruca, come back!" "What are they doing to her?" "They're tasting her to see if she's a bad nut," said Mr. Wonka. "You watch." Veruca struggled furiously. The squirrels held her tight and she couldn't move. The squirrel on her shoulder was tapping the side of her head with his knuckle. Then all at once the squirrels pulled Veruca to the ground and started carrying her across the floor. "My goodness, she is a bad nut after all," said Mr. Wonka. "Her must have sounded quite hollow." Veruca kicked and screamed, but it was no use. The tiny strong paws held her tightly, and she couldn't escape. "Where are they going to take her?" shrieked Miss Salt. She's going where all the other bad nuts go," said Mr. Willy Wonka. "Down the garbage chute." "My God, she's going down the chute," said Mr. Salt, staring through the glass door at his daughter. "Then save her!" cried Miss Salt. "Too late," said Mr. Wonka. "She's gone." And indeed she had. "But where?" shrieked Mr. Salt, flapping her arms. "What happened to the bad nuts? Where does the chute go to?" "That particular chute," said Mr. Wonka told her, "runs directly into the great big main garbage pipe which carries away all the rubbish from every part of the factory, all the floors, sweepings and potato peelings and rotten cabbages and fish heads and stuff like that." "Who eats fish and cabbage and potatoes in this factory? I'd like to know," said Mike TV. "Oh, I do, of course," answered Mr. Wonka. "You don't think I live on a cacao bean, do you?" But, shrieked Miss Salt, "where does the big pipe go into in the end?" "Why, to the furnace, of course," Mr. Wonka said calmly. "To the incinerator." Miss Salt opened her huge red mouth and started to scream. "Don't worry," said Mr. Wonka. "There's always a chance that they decided not to light it today." "A chance?" yelled Miss Salt. "But darling Veruca, she'll be sizzling like a sausage." "Quite right, my dear," said Mr. Salt. "Now, see here, Mr. Wonka," he added, "I think you've just got a shade too far this time." "I do indeed, my daughter. Maybe a bit of a frump, and I don't mind admitting it. But that doesn't mean you can roast her to a crisp. I'll have you know I'm extremely cross about this. I really am." "Oh, don't be cross, my dear sir," said Mr. Wonka. "I expect she'll turn up again sooner or later. Sooner or later, she may not have gone down at all. She may be stuck in the chute just below the entrance hole. And if that's the case, and all you'll have to do is go in and pull her up again." Hearing this, both Mr. and Miss Salt dashed into the nut room and ran over to the hole in the floor and peered in. "Veruca!" shouted Miss Salt. "Are you down there?" There was no answer. Miss Salt bent further forward to get a closer look. She was now kneeling right on the edge of the hole with her head down and her enormous behind sticking up in the air like a giant mushroom. It was a dangerous position to be in. She needed only one tiny little push, one gentle nudge in the right place, and that is exactly what the squirrels gave her. Over she toppled into the hole head first, shouting, screeching like a parrot. "Good gracious me," said Mr. Sole, as he watched his fat wife go tumbling down the hole. "What a lot of garbage there's going to be today." He saw her disappear into the darkness. "What's it like down there, Angina?" he called out. He leaned further forward. The squirrels rushed up behind him. "Help!" he shouted, but he was already toppling forward to the chute. He went, and just as his wife had done before, and his daughter. "Oh, dear!" cried Charlie, who was watching with the others through the door. "What on earth is going to happen to them now?" I expect someone will catch them at the bottom of the chute," said Mr. Wonka. "But what about the great fiery incinerator?" asked Charlie. "They only light it every other day," said Mr. Wonka. "Perhaps this one of the day when they let it go out. You never know. They might be lucky." "Shh!" said Grandpa Joe. "Listen, here comes another song." From far away down the corridor came a beating of drums, and then the singing began. "Veruca Sole," sang the Oompa Loompas. "Veruca Sole, the little brute, has just gone down the garbage chute. And as we very rightly thought that in case like this we ought to see the thing completely through, we polished off her parents too. Down goes Veruca down the drain, and here perhaps we should explain that she will meet as she descends of a rather different set of friends. To those that she has left behind, these won't nearly be refined. A fish head, for example, cut this morning from a hale, but hello, good morning, how do you do? How nice to meet you, how are you? And then a little further down, a mass of others gather round. A bacon rind, some rancid lard, a loaf of bread gone stale and hard, a steak that nobody could chew, an oyster from an oyster stew, some liverwurst so ugly, so old and gray, one smelled it from a mile away. A ricky pear, a thing that cat left on the stair, and lots of other things as well, each with a rather horrid smell. These are Veruca's newfound friends that she will meet as she descends, and this is the price she has to pay for going so very far astray. But now, my dears, we think you might be wondering, is it really right that every single bit of blame and all the scolding and the shame should fall upon Veruca Sole? Is she the only one at fault? For though she's spoiled, and dreadfully so, a girl can spoil herself, you know. Who spoiled her then? And who indeed? Who pandered to her every need? Who turned her into such a brat? Who are the culprits who did that? Alas, you needn't to look so far to find out who these sinners are. They are, and this is very sad, her loving parents, Mum and Dad, and that is why we're glad they fell into the garbage chute as well. Chapter 25. The Great Glass Elevator. "I've never seen anything like that," cried Mr. Wonka. "The children are disappearing like rabbits. But you mustn't worry about it. They all come out in the wash." Mr. Wonka looked at the little group that stood beside him in the corridor. There were only 2 children left. Now Mike TV and Charlie Bucket, and there were 3 grown-ups, Mr. and Miss TV and Grandpa Joe. Shall we move on? Mr. Wonka asked. Oh yes, cried Charlie and Grandpa Joe both together. My feet are getting tired, said Mike TV. I want to watch television. If you're tired, then we'd better take the elevator, said Mr. Wonka. It's over there. Come on, in we go. He skipped across the passage to a pair of double doors. The doors slid open, the 2 children and the grown-ups went in. Now then, cried Mr. Wonka, which button shall we press first? Take your pick. Charlie Bucket stared around him in astonishment. This was the craziest elevator he had ever seen. There were buttons everywhere. The walls and even the ceilings were covered all over with rows and rows and rows of small black push buttons. There must be 1,000 of them on each wall, and another 1,000 on the ceiling. And now Charlie noticed that every single button had a tiny printed label beside it telling you which room you would be taken to if you pressed it. This isn't just an ordinary up and down elevator, announced Mr. Wonka proudly. The elevator can go sideways and long ways and slant ways and any other way you can think of. If you can visit a single room in the whole factory, no matter what where it is, you simply press a button and zing, you're off. Fantastic, murmured Grandpa Joe. His eyes were shining with excitement as he stared at the rows and rows of buttons. The whole elevator is made of thick, clear glass, Mr. Wonka declared. Walls, doors, ceiling and floor, everything is made of glass so that you can see out. But there's nothing to see, said Mike TV. Choose a button, said Mr. Wonka. The 2 children may press 1 button each, so take your pick. Hurry up, in each room something delicious and wonderful is being made. Quickly, Charlie started reading some of the labels alongside the buttons. The rock candy mine, 10,000 feet deep, it said on one. Coconut ice skating rinks, it said on the other. Then strawberry juice water pistols, toffee apple trees for planting out in your garden, all sizes, exploding candy for your enemies, luminous lollies for eating in bed at night, mint jujubes for the boy next door, they'll give him green teeth for a month, cavity-filling caramels, no more dentists, stick jaw for talkative parents, wiggle sweet that wriggle delightfully in your tummy after swallowing, invisible chocolate bars for eating in class, candy-coated pencil for sucking, fizzy lemonade swimming pools, magic hand fudge. When you hold it in your hand, you taste it in your mouth. Rainbow drops, suck them, and you can spit in 6 different colors. Come on, cried Mr. Wonka. We can't wait all day. Isn't there a television room in all this lot? Asked Mike TV. Certainly there's a television room, Mr. Wonka said. That button over there. He pointed with his finger. Everybody looked. Television chocolate. It said on the tiny label beside the button. Whoopee! Shouted Miss Mike TV. That's for me. He stuck out his thumb and pressed the button. Instantly, there was a tremendous buzzing noise. The doors clanged shut, and the elevator leaped away as though it had been stung by a wasp. But it leapt sideways, and all the passengers except Mr. Wonka was holding onto a strap from the ceiling were flung off their feet onto the floor. Get up, cried Mr. Wonka, roaring with laughter. But just as they were staggering to their feet, the elevator changed direction and swerved violently round a corner. And over and went once more. "Help!" shouted Miss Teavee. "Take my hands, madam," said Mr. Wonka gallantly. "There you are. Now grab this strap. Everybody grab a strap. The long journey's not over yet." Old Grandpa Joe staggered to his feet and caught hold of a strap. Little Charlie, who couldn't possibly reach as high as that, put his arms around Grandpa Joe's leg and hung on tight. The elevator rushed on at the speed of a rocket. Now it was beginning to climb. It was shooting up and up on a steep, slanty course, as if it were climbing a very steep hill. Then slowly, as though it had come to the top of the hill, had gone over a precipice, it dropped like a stone, and Charlie felt his tummy coming right up into his throat. And Grandpa Joe shouted, "Yippee! Here we go!" And Miss Teavee cried out, The rope has broken. We're going to crash." And Mr. Wonka said, "Calm yourself, my dear lady," and patted her comfortingly on the arm. And then Grandpa Joe looked down at Charlie, who was clinging to his leg, and he said, "Are you all right, Charlie?" Charlie shouted, "I love it. It's like being on a roller coaster." And through the glass walls of the elevator, as they rushed along, they caught something glimpses of strange and wonderful things going on in some of the rooms. And there was a spout with brown sticky stuff oozing out of it onto the floor. The crazy mountain made entirely of fudge, with Oompa Loompas all roped together for safety, hacking huge hunks of fudge out of its sides. A machine with white powder spewing out like a storm, a lake of hot caramel with steam coming off it, a village of Oompa Loompas with tiny houses and streets and hundreds of Oompa Loompas, children no more than 4 inches high playing in the streets. And now the elevator began flattening out again, but it seemed to be going faster than ever, and Charlie could hear the scream and wind outside as it hurtled forward, and it twisted and it turned, and it went up, and it went up, and "I'm going to be sick," yelled Miss Teavee, turning green in the face. "Please don't be sick," said Mr. Wonka. "Try and stop me," said Miss Teavee. "Then you better take this," said Mr. Wonka, and he swept his magnificent black top hat up his head and held it out, upside down in front of Miss Teavee's mouth. "Make this awful thing stop," ordered Mr. Teavee. "I can't do that," said Mr. Wonka. "It won't stop till we get there. I only hope no one's using the other elevator at this moment." "What other elevator?" screamed Miss Teavee. "The one that goes the opposite way on the same track as this one," said Mr. Wonka. "Holy mackerel!" cried Mr. Teavee. "You mean we may have a collusion?" "I've always been lucky so far," said Mr. Wonka. "Now I'm going to be sick," yelled Miss Teavee. No, said Mr. Wonka. "Not now. We're nearly there. Don't spoil my hat." Then next moment there was screaming of brakes, and the elevator began to slow down. Then it stopped altogether. "Sunrise," said Mr. Teavee, wiping his great sweaty face with a handkerchief. "Never again," gasped Miss Teavee, and then the doors of the elevator slid open, and Mr. Wonka said, "Just a minute now, listen to me. I want everybody to be very careful in this room. There's dangerous stuff around in here, and you must not tamper with it." Chapter 26. The Television Chocolate Room. The Teavee family, together with Charlie and Grandpa Joe, stepped out of the elevator into a room so dazzling bright and dazzling white that they screwed up their eyes in pain and stopped walking. Mr. Wonka handed each of them a pair of dark glasses and said, "Put these on quick, and don't take them off in here, where whatever you do, this light could blind you." As soon as Charlie had his dark glasses on, he was able to look around him in comfort. He saw a large, narrow room The room was painted with white all over. Even the floor was white, and there wasn't a speck of dust anywhere. From the ceiling, huge lamps hung down and bathed the room in a brilliant blue-white light. The room was completely bare, except at the far ends. At one of these ends, there was an enormous camera on wheels, and a whole army of Oompa Loompas was clustering around it, oiling its joints and adjusting its knobs and polishing its great glass lens. The Oompa Loompas were all dressed in the most extraordinary way. They were wearing brightened space suits, complete with helmets and goggles. At least they looked like space units, and they were working in complete silence. Watching them try to experience the queer sense of danger. There was something dangerous about this whole business, and the Oompa Loompas knew it. There was no chattering or singing among them here, and they moved about over the huge black camera slowly and carefully in their scarlet space suits. At the very other end of the room, about 50 paces away from the camera, a single Oompa Loompa was wearing a spacesuit, was sitting at a black table gazing at the screen of a very large television set. "Here we go," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down with excitement. "This is a testing room for my very latest and greatest invention, television chocolate." "But what is television chocolate?" asked Mike TV. "Good heavens, child, stop interrupting me," said Mr. Wonka. "It works by television. I don't like television myself. I suppose it's all right in small doses. The children never seem to be able to take it in small doses. They want to sit there all day long, staring at the screen." "That's me," said Mike TV. "Shut up," said Mr. TV. "Thank you," said Mr. Wonka. "I shall now tell you how this amazing television set of mine works. But first of all, do you know how ordinary television works? It is very simple. At one end, where the picture is being taken, you have a large movie camera, and you start photographing something. The photographs are then split up into millions of tiny pieces, which are so small that you can't see them. And these little pieces are shot out into the sky by electricity. In the sky, they go whizzing around all over the place until suddenly they hit the antenna on the roof of somebody's house, and then go flashing down the wire that leads right into the back of the television. And in there, they get jiggled and juggled around until at last every single one of those millions of tiny pieces is split back into its right place, just like a jigsaw puzzle. And presto, the photograph appears on that screen. "That isn't exactly how it works," my TV said. "I'm a little deaf in my left ear," said Mr. Wonka said. "You must forgive me if I don't hear everything you say." "I say that isn't exactly how it works," shouted Mike TV. "You're a nice boy," Mr. Wonka said, "but you talk too much. Now then." The very first time I saw ordinary televisions working, I was struck by a tremendous idea. "Look here," I shouted. "If these people can break up a photograph into millions of pieces and send the pieces whizzing through the air and then put them together again at the other end, why can't I do the same thing with a bar of chocolate? Why can't I send a real bar of chocolate whizzing through the air in tiny pieces and then put the pieces together at the other end, all ready to be eaten?" "Impossible," said Mike TV. "You think so?" said Mr. Wonka. "Well, watch this. I shall send a bar of my very best chocolate from one end of this room to the other by television. Get ready. There, bring in the chocolate." Immediately, 6 Oompa Loompas marched forward, carrying on their shoulders the most enormous balls of chocolate Charlie had ever seen. It was about the size of the mattress he slept on at home. It has to be big, Mr. Wonka explained, because whenever you send something by television, it comes out much smaller than it was when it went in. Even with ordinary television, when you photograph a big man, he never comes out on the screen any taller than a pencil. Does he? Here we go, then get ready. No, stop, hold everything. You there, Mike TV, stand back. You're too close to the camera. There are dangerous rays coming out of that thing. They could break you up into million tiny pieces in 1 second. That's why the Oompa Loompas are wearing spacesuits. The suits protect them, alright? That's better now. Then switch on. One of the Oompa Loompas caught hold of the large switch and pulled it down. There was a blinding flash. The chocolate's gone, shouted Grandpa Joe, waving his arms. He was quite right. The whole enormous bar of chocolate had disappeared completely into thin air. It's on its way, cried Mr. Wonka. It is now rushing through the air above our heads in a million tiny pieces. Quick, come over here. He dashed over to the other end of the room where the large television set was standing. On the other swallowed him. Watch the screen, he cried. Here it comes, look. The screen flickered and lit up. Then suddenly, a small bar of chocolate appeared in the middle of the screen. Take it, shouted Mr. Wonka, growing more and more excited. How can you take it? asked Mike TV, laughing. It's just a picture on a television screen. Charlie Bucket, cried Mr. Wonka. You take it. Reach out and grab it. Charlie pulled out his hand and touched the screen. And suddenly, miraculously, the bar of chocolate came away in his fingers. He was so surprised, he nearly dropped it. Eat it, shouted Mr. Wonka. Go on and eat it. It'll be delicious. It's the same bar. Go on. It's the same bar. It's gotten smaller on the journey, that's all. It's absolutely fantastic, gasped Grandpa Joe. It's a miracle. Just imagine, cried Mr. Wonka. When I started using this across the country, you'll be sitting at home watching a television, and suddenly a commercial will flash onto the screen when a voice will say, Eat Wonka's chocolates. They're the best in the world. If you don't believe us, try one for yourself now. And you simply reach out and take one. How about that, eh? Terrific, cried Grandpa Joe. It will change the world. Chapter 27. Mike TV is sent by television. Mike TV was even more excited than Grandpa Joe at seeing a bar of chocolate being sent by television. But Mr. Wonka, he shouted, can we send another thing through the air in the same way? Breakfast cereal, for instance? Oh, my sainted aunt, cried Mr. Wonka. Don't mention that disgusting stuff in front of me. Do you know what breakfast cereal is made of? It's made of all those little curly wooden shavings you find in pencil sharpeners. But could you send it by television if you wanted to, as you do chocolate? asked Mike TV. Of course I could. And what about people? asked Mike TV. Could you send a real-life person from one place to another in the same way? A person? cried Mr. Wonka. Are you off your rocker? Hey, but couldn't it be done? Good heavens, child, I really don't know. I suppose it could. Yes, I'm pretty sure it could. Of course it could. I wouldn't like to risk it, though. It might have some very nasty results. But Mike TV was already off and running. The moment he heard Mr. Wonka saying, I'm pretty sure it could. Of course it could. He turned away and started running as fast as he could toward the other end of the room where the great camera was standing. Look at me, he shouted as he ran. I'm going to be the first person in the world to be sent by television. No, cried Mr. Wonka. Mike, screamed Miss TV. Stop, come back. You'll be turned into a million tiny pieces. But there was no stopping Mike TV now. The crazy boy rushed on, and when he reached the enormous camera, he jumped straight for the switch, scattering Oompa Loompas right and left as he went. See you later, alligator, he shouted, and he pulled down the switch, and as he did, he leaped out into the glare of the mighty lens. There was a blinding flash. There was silence. Then Miss TV ran forward, but she couldn't stop dead in the middle of the room, and she stood there. She stood there, staring at the place where her son had been, and her great red mouth opened wide, and she screamed, "He's gone! He's gone!" "Good heavens, he has gone!" shouted Mr. TV. Mr. Wonka hurried forward and placed a hand gently on Miss TV's shoulder. "We shall have to hope for the best," he said. "You must pray that your little boy will come out unharmed at the other end." "Mike!" screamed Miss TV, clasping her head in her hands. "Where are you?" "I'll tell you where he is," said Mr. TV. "He's whizzing around above our heads in a million tiny pieces." "Don't talk about it," wailed Miss TV. "You must watch the television set," said Mr. Wonka. "He may come out through any moment." Mr. and Miss TV and Grandpa Joe and little Charlie and Mr. Wonka all gathered around the television and stared tensely at the screen. The screen was quite blank. "He's taking a heck of a long time to come across," said Mr. TV, wiping his brow. Oh dear," said Mr. Wonka. "I do hope that no part of him gets left behind." "What on earth do you mean?" asked Mr. TV sharply. "I don't wish to alarm you," said Mr. Wonka, "but it does sometimes happen that only about half of the little pieces find their way into the television set. It happened last week. I don't know why, but the result was that only half a bar of chocolate came through." Miss TV let out a scream of horror. "You mean only half of Mike is coming back to us?" she cried. "Let's do hope it's the top half," said Mr. TV. "Hold everything," said Mr. Wonka. "Watch the screen. Something's happening." The screen has suddenly begun to flicker. Then something wavy lines appeared. Mr. Wonka adjusted one of the knobs and the wavy lines went away. And now very slowly the screen began to get brighter and brighter. "Here he comes," yelled Mr. Wonka. "Yes, that's him, all right." "Is he all in one piece?" cried Miss TV. "I'm not sure," said Mr. Wonka. "It's too early to tell." Faintly at first, but becoming clearer and clearer every second, the picture of Mike TV appeared on the screen. He was standing up and waving at the audience and grinning from ear to ear. "But he's a midget!" shouted Mr. TV. "Mr. TV!" "Mike!" cried Miss TV. "Are you all right? Are there many bits of you missing? Isn't he going to get any bigger?" shouted Mr. TV. "Talk to me, Mike!" cried Miss TV. "Say something. Tell me you are all right." A tiny little voice, no louder than the squeaking of a mouse, came out of the television set. "Hi, Mom," it said. "Hi, Pop. Look at me. I'm the first person ever to be sent by television." "Grab him," ordered Mr. Wonka. "Quick!" Miss TV shot out a hand and picked the tiny figure of Mike TV out of the screen. "Hooray!" cried Mr. Wonka. "He's all in one piece. He's completely unharmed." "You call that unharmed?" snapped Miss TV, peering at the little speck of a boy who was now running to the fro across the palm of her hand, waving his pistols in the air. It was certainly not more than an inch tall. "He shrunk," said Mr. TV. "Of course he's shrunk," said Mr. Wonka. "What did you expect?" "This is terrible," wailed Miss TV. "What are we going to do?" And Mr. TV said, "We can't send him back to school like this. He'll get trod upon. He'll get squashed. He won't be able to do anything," cried Miss TV. "Oh, yes, I will," squeaked the tiny voice of Mike TV. I still will be able to watch television." "Never again," shouted Mr. TV. "I'm throwing the television set right out the window the moment we get home. I have had enough of television." When he heard this, Mike TV flew into a terrible tantrum. He started jumping up and down on the palm of his mother's hand, screaming and yelling and trying to bite her fingers. "I want to watch television," he squeaked. "I want to watch television. I want to watch television. I want to watch television." "Here, Give him to me, said Mr. TV, and he took the tiny boy and shoved him into the breast pocket of his jacket and stuffed a handkerchief on top. Squeals and yells came from the inside the pocket, and the pocket shook as the furious little prisoner fought to get out. "Oh, Mr. Wonka," wailed. "Oh, Mr. Wonka," wailed Miss TV. "How can we make him grow?" "Well," said Mr. Wonka, stroking his beard and gazing thoughtfully at the ceiling, "I would say that it's a wee bit tricky, but small boys are extremely springy and elastic. They stretch like mad. So what we'll do, we'll put him in a special machine I have for tested the stretchiness of chewing gum. Maybe that will bring him back to what he was." "Oh, thank you," said Miss TV. "Don't mention it, dear lady. How far do you think he'll stretch?" asked Mr. TV. "Maybe miles," said Mr. Wonka. "Who knows? But it's going to be awfully thin. Everything's get thinner when you stretch it." "You mean like chewing gum?" asked Mr. TV. "Exactly." "How thin will he be?" asked Miss TV anxiously. "I haven't the foggiest idea," said Mr. Wonka, "and it doesn't really matter anyway, because we'll soon fatten him up again. All we'll have to do is give him a triple overdose of my wonderful super vitamin candy." Super vitamin candy contains huge amounts of vitamin A and vitamin B. It also contains vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin F, vitamin G, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin F. It also contains vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin F, vitamin G, vitamin I, vitamin J, vitamin K, vitamin L, vitamin M, vitamin N, vitamin O, vitamin P, vitamin Q, vitamin R, vitamin T, vitamin U, vitamin V, vitamin W, vitamin X, vitamin Y, and believe it or not, vitamin Z. The only two vitamins it doesn't have in it are vitamin S, because it makes you sick, and vitamin H, because it makes you grow horns out of the top of your head like a bull. But it does have in a very small amount of the rarest and most magical vitamin of them all, Vitamin Wonka. "And what will that do to him?" asked Mr. TV anxiously. "It'll make his toes grow out until they're as long as his fingers." "Oh, no!" cried Miss TV. "Don't be silly," said Mr. Wonka. "It's most useful. He'll be able to play the piano with his feet." "But Mr. Wonka, no arguments, please," said Mr. Wonka. He turned away and clicked his fingers 3 times in the air. And Oompa Loompa appeared immediately and stood beside him. "Follow these orders," said Mr. Wonka, handing the Oompa Loompa a piece of paper on which he had written full instructions. "And you'll find the boy in his father's pocket. Off you go. Goodbye, Mr. TV. Goodbye, Miss TV, and please don't look so worried. They all come out in the wash, you know, every one of them." At the end of the room, the Oompa Loompa around a giant camera was already beating their tiny drums and beginning to jog up and down to the rhythm. "There they go again," said Mr. Wonka. "I'm afraid you can't stop them singing." Little Charlie caught Grandpa Joe's hand, and the two of them stood beside Mr. Wonka in the middle of this long, bright room, listening to the Oompa Loompas as this is what they sang. "The most important thing we've learned so far as children are concerned, it's never, never, never let them near your television set. Or better still, you don't install the idiotic thing at all. In almost every house we've been, we've watched them gaping at the screen. They loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. Last week in someone's place, we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. They sit and stare and sit until they're hypnotized by it. until they're absolutely drunk with all that shocking, ghastly junk. Oh yes, we know it keeps them still. They don't climb out of the window still. They never fire or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. But did you ever stop to think, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot? It rots the sense in the head. It kills imagination dead. It clogs and clutters up the mind. It makes a child so dull and blind he can no longer understand the fantasy of fairyland. His brain becomes a sort of soft as cheese. His powers of things rust and freeze. He cannot think, he only sees. All right, you'll cry, all right, you'll say, but if we take the set away, what shall we do to entertain our darling children? Please explain. What we'll answer this by asking you, what use the darling one wants to do? How use they keep themselves contented? Before this monster use was invented, have you forgotten? Don't you know? Let's say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They read and read and read and read, and they proceed to read some more. Great Scott, gadzooks! One half their lives were reading books. The nursery shelves held books galore. Books cluttered at the nursery floor, and the bedroom by the bed. More books were waiting to be read. Such wondrous, fine, fantastic tales of dragons, gypsies, queens, and whales, and treasure isles and distant shores, where smugglers rode with muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple pants, and sailing ships and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pot, staring away at something hot. It smells so good. What can it be? Good gracious, it's Penelope. The younger ones had Beatrix Potter with Mr. Todd, the dirty rotter, and Squirrel Nutkin, Pickling Bland, and Miss Tiggy Winkle, and just how the camel got his hump, and how the monkey lost his rump, and Mr. Toad, and bless my soul, and there's Mr. Rat and Mr. Mole. Oh, books, what books they used to know, those children living long ago. Oh, please, we beg, we pray, go throw your TV set away, and in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. Then fill the shelves with lots of books, ignoring all the dirty looks, the screams and yells, the bites and kicks, the children biting you with sticks. Fear not, because we promise you that in about a week or two of having nothing else to do, they'll now begin to feel the need of having something good to read. And once they start, oh boy, you watch the slowly growing joy that fills their hearts. They'll grow to keen. They'll wonder what they'd ever seen in that ridiculous machine. That nauseating, full, unclean, repulsive television screen. And later, Rich and every kid will love you more for what you did. P.S. Regarding my TV, we are much regret that we shall simply have to wait and see if we can get him back his height. But if we can't, it's certain right. Chapter 28. Only Charlie left. Which room shall it be next? Said Mr. Wonka as he turned away and darted into the elevator. Come on, hurry up, we must be going. And how many children are there left now? Little Charlie looked at Grandpa Joe, and Grandpa Joe looked back at little Charlie. Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe called after him, there's only Charlie left now. Mr. Wonka swung round and stared at Charlie. There was a silence. Charlie stood there, holding tightly onto Grandpa Joe's hand. You mean you're the only one left? Said Mr. Wonka, pretended to be surprised. Why, yes, whispered Charlie, yes. Mr. Wonka suddenly exploded with excitement. But my dear boy, he cried out, that means you've won. He rushed out to the elevator and started shaking Charlie's hand so furiously it nearly came off. Oh, I do congratulate you, he cried. I really do. I'm absolutely delighted. It would be better. How wonderful this is. I had a hunch, right from the beginning that it was going to be you. Well done, Charlie, well done. This is terrific. Now the fun is really going to start. But we mustn't dally. There's even less time to lose now than there was before. We have an enormous number of things to do before the day is up. Just think of the arrangements you have to be made and the people we have to fetch. Luckily for us, we have the great glass elevator to speed things up. Jump in, my dear Charlie. Jump in, you too, Grandpa Joe, sir. No, after you. That's the way. Now then, this time I shall choose the button we are going to press. Mr. Wonka's bright, twinkling blue eyes rested for a moment on Charlie's face. Something crazy is going to happen now, Charlie thought, but he wasn't frightened. He wasn't even nervous. He was very terrifically excited, and so was Grandpa Joe. The old man's face was shining with excitement as he watched every move that Mr. Wonka made. Mr. Wonka was reaching for a button high up on the glass ceiling of the elevator. Charlie and Grandpa Joe both craned their necks to read what it said on the little label beside the button. It said, "Up and out." Up and out, thought Charlie. What sort of room is that? Mr. Wonka pressed the button. The door closed. Hold on, cried Mr. Wonka. Then wham! The elevator shot straight up like a rocket. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe. Charlie was clinging to Grandpa Joe's leg, and Mr. Wonka was holding onto a strap to the ceiling, and up they went. Up, straight up this time, with no twisting or turnings, and Charlie could hear the whistle of the air outside as the elevator went faster and faster. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe again. Yippee! Here we go! Faster! cried Mr. Wonka, banging the wall of the elevator with his hand. Faster, faster! If we don't go any faster than this, we shall never get through. Through what? Shouted Grandpa Joe. What have we got to get through? Aha! Cried Mr. Wonka. You wait and see. I've been longing to press this button for years, but I've never done it until now. It was tempted many times. Yes, I was, but I couldn't bear the thought of making a big hole in the roof of the factory. Here you go, boys, up and out. But you don't mean, shouted Grandpa Joe, you don't really mean that this elevator... Oh, yes, I do, answered Mr. Wonka. You wait and see, up and out. But, it's made of glass, shouted Grandpa Joe. It'll break into a million pieces. I suppose it might, said Mr. Wonka, cheerful as ever, as it's pretty thick glass all the same. The elevator rushed on, going up and up and up and up, faster and faster and faster. Suddenly, crash, and the most tremendous noise of splintering wood and broken tiles came from directly above their heads, and Grandpa Joe shouted, "Help! It's the end! We're done for!" So Mr. Wonka said. And Mr. Wonka said, "No, we're not. We're through. We're out." Sure enough, the elevator had shot up through the roof of the factory and was now rising into the sky like a rocket, and the sunshine was pouring in through the glass roof in 5 seconds. In 5 seconds, they were 1,000 feet up in the sky. "The elevator's gone mad," shouted Grandpa Joe. "Have no fear, my dear sir," said Mr. Wonka calmly, and he pressed another button. The elevator stopped. It stopped and hung in the mid-air, hovering like a helicopter, hovering over the factory and over the very town itself, which lay spread out below them like a picture postcard. Looking down through the glass floor on which she was standing, Charlie could see the small, far-away houses and the streets, and the snow that lay thickly over everything. It was an eerie and frightening feeling to be standing on clear glass high up in the sky. It made you feel that you weren't standing on anything at all. "Are you all right?" cried Grandpa Joe. "How does this thing stay up?" "Candy power," said Mr. Wonka. 1,000,000 candy power. "Oh, look," he pointing down. "There go the other children. They're returning home." Chapter 29. The other children go home. "We must go down and take a look at our little friends before we do anything else," said Mr. Wonka. He pressed a different button, and the elevator dropped lower, and soon it was hovering just above the entrance gates to the factory. Looking down now, Charlie could see the children and their parents standing in a little group just inside the gates. "I can only see 3, he said. "Who's missing?" "I expect it's McTeevee," said Mr. Wonka, "but he'll be coming along soon. Do you see the trucks?" Mr. Wonka pointed to a line of gigantic covered vans parked in a line nearby. "Yes," Charlie said. "What are they for?" "Don't you remember what it said on the golden ticket? Every child goes home with a lifetime supply of candy. There's one truckload for each of them, loaded to the brim." "Aha," Mr. Wonka went on. There goes our friend Augustus Gloop. Do you see him? He's getting into the first truck with his mother and father." "You mean he's really all right?" asked Charlie, astonished. Even after going up that awful pipe? "He's very much all right," said Mr. Wonka. "He's changed," said Grandpa Joe, peering down through the glass wall of the elevator. "He used to be fat. Now he's thin as a straw." "Of course he's changed," said Mr. Wonka, laughing. "He got squeezed in the pipe, don't you remember? And look, there goes Miss Violet Berry-Gordy, the great gum chewer. It seems as though they've managed to de-juice her after all. I'm so glad. And now look how healthy she looks. Much better than before." "But she's purple in face," cried Grandpa Joe. "So she is," said Mr. Wonka. "Ah, well, there's nothing we can do about that." "Good gracious," cried Charlie. "Look at poor Veruca Salt and Mr. Salt and Miss Salt. They're simply covered with garbage." "And here comes McTeevee," said Grandpa Joe. "Good heavens, what have they done to him? He's about 10 feet tall and thin as a wire." "They've overstretched him on the gum stretcher machine," said Mr. Wonka. "How very careless." "But how dreadful for him," cried Charlie. "Nonsense," said Mr. Wonka. "He's very lucky. Every basketball team in the country will be trying to get him. But now," he added, "it is time you left these poor silly children. I have something very important to talk to you about, my dear Charlie." Mr. Wonka pressed another button, and the elevator swung upwards into the sky. Chapter 30. Charlie's Chocolate Factory. The great glass elevator was now hovering high over the town. Inside the elevator stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie. "How I love my chocolate factory," said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused and he turned around and looked at Charlie with a most serious expression on his face. "Do you love it too, Charlie?" he asked. "Oh, yes," cried Charlie. "I think it's the most wonderful place in the whole world. I'm very pleased to hear you say that," said Mr. Wonka, looking more seriously than ever. He went on staring at Charlie. "Yes," he said, "I am very pleased indeed to you say that. And now I shall tell you why." Mr. Wonka cocked his head to one side, and all at once the tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile appeared around the corners of his eyes, and he said, "You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will become yours." Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "It's quite true," said Mr. Wonka said, smiling broadly now. "I really am going to give it to you. That's all right, isn't it?" "Giving it to him?" gasped Grandpa Joe. "He must be joking." "I'm not joking, sir. I'm deadly serious." But, why should you want to give your factory to little Charlie?" "Listen," Mr. Wonka said, "I'm an old man. I'm much older than you think. I can't go on forever. I've got no children of my own family at all. So who is going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come in and take over from me. But I don't want that sort of person. I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up person won't listen to me. He won't learn. He will try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child, one to whom I can tell all my most precious candy-making secrets while I am still alive." "So that is why you sent out the golden tickets," cried Charlie. "Exactly," said Mr. Wonka. "I have decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one I like best at the end of the day will be the winner." "But Mr. Wonka," stammered Grandpa Joe, "do you really and truly mean that you were giving the whole of this enormous factory to little Charlie after all?" "There is no time to argue," cried Mr. Wonka. "We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family, Charlie's father and his mother, and anybody else that's around. They can live all in the factory now on. They can all help to run it until Charlie's old enough to do it by himself. Where do you live, Charlie?" Charlie peered down through the glass elevator at the snow-covered house that lay below. "It's over there," he said, pointing. "It's that little cottage right on the edge of the town, the tiny little one." "I see it!" cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed some more buttons, and the elevator shut down toward Charlie's house. "I'm afraid my mother won't come with us," Charlie said sadly. "Why ever not?" "Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George. But they must come too." "They can't," Charlie said. They're very old, and they haven't been out of bed for 20 years. "Then we'll take the bed along as well with them in it," said Mr. Wonka. "There's plenty of room in this elevator for a bed." "You can't get the bed out of the house," said Grandpa Joe. "It wouldn't go through the door." "You mustn't despair," cried Mr. Wonka. "That thing is impossible. You watch." The elevator was now hovering over the roof of the Bucket's little house. "What are you going to do?" cried Charlie. I'm going right on it to fetch them," said Mr. Wonka. "How?" asked Grandpa George. "Through the roof," said Mr. Wonka, pressing another button. "No!" shouted Charlie. "Stop!" shouted Grandpa Joe. Crash went the elevator right through the elevator, right through the roof of the house into the old people's bedroom. Showers of dust and broken tiles and bits of wood and cockroaches and spiders and bricks and cement went raining down on the 3 old ones who were lying in the bed, and each of them thought that the end of the world has come. Grandma Georgina fainted. Grandma Georgina dropped her false teeth. Grandpa George put his head under the blanket, and Mr. and Miss Bucket came rushing in front from the next door. "Save us!" cried Grandma Josephine. "Calm yourself, my darling wife," said Grandpa Joe, stepping out of the elevator. "It's only us." "Mother!" cried Charlie, rushing into Mr. Bucket's arms. "Mother, listen to what's happened. We're all going back to live in Mr. Wonka's factory, and we're going to help him run it, and he's given it all to me, and "What are you talking about?" said Miss Bucket. "Just look at our house," cried poor Mr. Bucket. "It's in ruin." My dear sir, said Mr. Wonka, jumping forward and shaking Mr. Bucket warmly by the hand. I'm so very glad to meet you. You mustn't worry about your house. From now on, you're never going to need it again. Anyway, who is this crazy man? Cried Grandma Josephine. He could have killed us all. This, said Grandpa Joe, is Mr. Willy Wonka himself. It took quite a time for Grandpa Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone exactly what had been happening to them all day. And even then they all refused to ride back to the factory in the elevator. I'd rather die in my bed, shouted Grandma Josephine. So would I, said Grandma Georgina. I refuse to go, announced Grandpa George. So Mr. Wonka and Grandpa Joe and Charlie, taking no notice to their screams, simply pushed the bed into the elevator. They pushed Mr. and Miss Bucket in after it. Then they got in themselves. Mr. Wonka pressed a button. The doors closed. Grandma Georgina screamed, and the elevator rose up off the floor and shot through the hole in the roof, out into the sky. Into the open sky. Charlie climbed onto the bed and tried to calm the 3 old people who were still petrified with fear. Please don't be frightened, he said. It's quite safe, and we're going to the most wonderful place in the world. Charlie's right, said Grandpa Joe. Will there be anything to eat when we get there? Asked Grandma Josephine. I'm starving. The whole family is starving. Anything to eat? Cried Charlie, laughing. Oh, you just wait and see.